Hello everyone, welcome back to another stream. Hope you're doing well as always. I adjusted some settings on my microphone, so hopefully it should sound better. Apparently the NVIDIA like noise reduction stuff might have been causing like the little staticky audio cuts that was going on with my mic, so hopefully this fixes things. If you guys notice that the issue has persisted, please let me know, and then I might try some other stuff. So anyway, Eliza Astanex, iMan, welcome back to stream. How's it going? Yesterday on stream, we watched 3 videos by Ontos. They were Deciphering Farum Azula's Secrets, Negrito's Twin Bird Unveiled in Elden Ring's Lore, The Age of Perfect Order, Radagon is Marika Explained, then Egyptian Mythology, Elden Ring Shadow of the Erdtree DLC Prediction. So today, I thought we could look at Baldur's Gate 3 was a wake-up call by Legendary Drops. I think we watched one video by him before and I liked it, and this seemed like a fun video to watch. Then I thought we could look at Elden Tales, The Coliseum. Then following The Coliseum up with Bernal's Underrated and Wild Quest, Elden Ring Lore by Miss Chalice, because they kind of seem thematically related to me somehow. And then, depending how much time we have left after that, Gold and Silver by Elden Tales as well. So, that's what I've got going on for tonight. It's 5 a.m. by iMan. It's pretty dedicated. Although you like work late or like overnight, don't you? You usually watch while you're working or something? Or maybe I'm confusing you with somebody else. Okay, so let's go ahead and start off with Baldur's Gate 3 was a wake-up call by Legendary Drops.
I believe that we are being misled, misdirected, deceived.
Ooh, I'm starting off spicy with this video. Okay, hold on. Let me... Oh, no, I guess it's all right. Sorry for the dog noises. Okay.
I believe that we are being misled, misdirected, deceived. And I believe that it's being done on purpose. See, we've had this conversation around Baldur's Gate 3 and the state of AAA gaming for quite a while now. Different content creators that are weighing in, publications, as well as different journalists. Sometimes even tweets. But the focus of the conversation continues to shift, and it shifts away from the thing that is the most important part of the entire conversation, and I believe that that's actually being done on purpose. Whether some people know it or not. See, Baldur's Gate 3 was a wake-up call, but it's not the first time that we've seen this. We saw the same thing with Elden Ring, a game that was released to high praise, reviewed well, and that the players loved. However, it was also a game that was highly criticized by developers and journalists, judging the game on simple things like UI or its lack of direction in the world, regardless if the players loved those things or not. Elden Ring was a game that was both innovative in its game design and also in its world design. But more than anything, it was...
Yeah, as far as like the innovations that Elden Ring brought to the table, in some ways, I don't think it's that innovative of a game, but I guess that really depends on what you define as like innovation. And I think in other ways, it actually is really innovative, which I know kind of sounds like a contradiction. But what I mean by that is like the core gameplay loop and the combat mechanics of Elden Ring, I do think is a bit reductive and is just kind of like Dark Souls 3 plus, which isn't necessarily a bad thing. Like Dark Souls 3 is a great game, don't get me wrong, but it's a very tried and true and tested formula, and part of me worries that it's like starting to wear out its welcome a little bit. I do think a lot of the issues with Dark Souls 3 was kind of ironed out with Elden Ring's approach to like the systems and allowing more freedom of control, so that way you could swap around Ashes of War a lot more freely, and I think that was a huge upgrade. But now that we finally have other games that can directly be compared to Elden Ring to some degree and show that there are other yet viable systems to offer with like Lies of P's weapon crafting system, I hope that they will innovate on what they've currently got a bit more. So what other forms of innovation does Elden Ring have? I would argue a lot of the smaller things which add up to make it a smoother experience overall. So things like the stakes of Marika, Torrent to a smaller degree, although I think Torrent does have like a lot of good and bad that comes along with him. But I guess, to be fair, even before Torrent and Elden Ring, you could have always just like ran past most enemies in the Dark Souls games, with the exception of Dark Souls 2 because of the lack of iframes on opening and closing doors and things like that. But other than like its open world design, which has issues, I don't think it was like crazy innovative, but that's not necessarily a good or a bad thing, because as they say, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. And I mean, look at how many... Hold on, I might have to yell at the dog. Yeah, I'm talking about you. What was I saying? Yeah, just look at how many like Mega Man games have come out, and a lot of them are barely innovative at all, but they're still fun games. So it's not necessarily a good or a bad thing, and it just kind of comes down to individual preference there. So Laza says it's 4 a.m. there. You can't sleep? Oh man, that's pretty rough. But welcome into stream. Nice to have you again. Jesse R., nice to see you again. And then Iman said Elden Ring innovated jumping. Disagreed, because we have that in Sekiro, but as far as like the Dark Souls style combat, I do think Elden Ring brought enough to the table to make jumping a more viable option. And I would argue in some ways, I don't think that they went far enough to add an extra like level of verticality to combat. I mean, there was a little bit, but there could have been a bit more. Like I really did enjoy jumping over like the Crucible Knight stomp or like the Godfrey stomp and being able to counterattack with like a jumping R1. But if anything, I feel like, especially if you're using colossal weapons, the jumping attacks might have been a little bit too powerful and kind of really outshone the charged R2s for many weapons, in my opinion. Never insult the best horse. I'm not insulting Torrent. I'm insulting the enemy/level design, where you could just kind of trivialize most content by sprinting past it all.
It was a game that provided a significant amount of value to the player, and a dense amount of value at that. And that's the word that we keep losing track of. Value.
Yeah, and obviously Elden Ring is well worth the value for the vast majority of players, and I don't think you can say that the devs of Elden Ring were wrong for what they did, because it really resonated with a huge chunk of the fan base, and it won so many awards. It was hyped up for so long because FromSoft had slowly but steadily churned out quality product after quality product, and then it just all came to a head with Elden Ring, and it just kind of finally made waves and really started to make other developers take notice. So I consider that a dub, just because like from Elden Ring and FromSoft, we're now getting more games like Lies of P, and to a lesser extent, Lords of the Fallen. I know Zeostorm was talking about like another Souls-like that just came out recently that I've never heard of it before, and I'll like need to watch a trailer for it sometime. So maybe we've got some other contenders up and coming as well. Hey, Scaleezy, welcome back in.
And that's the most important thing to us. Fast forward from Elden Ring to Baldur's Gate 3. A conversation has started about how AAA studios can't be held to the same standards as an independent studio. Journalists, PR agencies, and other institutions dogpiling on the consumer, trying to suppress our outrage in response to the state of the AAA industry. Us asking, why can't you make games like Larian does? And it's not as if we're trying to ask them to do anything new. We're just asking them to do what they used to do. Many of our favorite games, favorite franchises started out as Larian. Passionate studios working on something they love, making games that they love playing.
And yeah, that's a really good point. Like AAA games now compared to AAA games in the 90s are completely different beasts. And I guess in many ways you probably could compare Larian to more agile, not fully AAA studios back in the day and make that comparison like land, because I honestly don't know like how fair of a comparison it is, but it's almost like, to me in my mind, like Blizzard, they started out pretty small, but they grew a cult following, and then they just exploded with World of Warcraft, which isn't to say that they didn't exist beforehand, because they did, but you know, it just takes that one quality product to really get yourself out there. Hey, Liza, yeah, any plans on what video to make next? So the next video that I intend to cover is probably going to be like my magnum opus before the DLC launches, hopefully. And I intend to cover pretty much everything surrounding the Grace of Gold and the state of the Grace of Gold throughout the history of the Lands Between. Iman said we still want a Warcraft 2 movie. We waited 10 years for the first. Honestly, I saw the Warcraft movie in theaters, and I really didn't think it was bad. I thought it was pretty good. Like, I know some people like wanted more, but I mean, for what it was, I thought it was a really good intro into the world of Warcraft for a more casual audience that didn't necessarily know about that world. And I thought it was about as good an introduction as anybody could really have expected. So I was kind of surprised and impressed by it. Or was it 15 years for it? I don't know.
Making something that others wanted to enjoy. Blizzard, Ubisoft, EA, Microsoft, Take-Two, Bungie, and more used to be known as the companies that you could always buy something from, and more times than not, it was going to be one of your greatest experiences and a game of value.
Yeah, I don't mean to like pause it so much, but it's so funny that like Ubisoft always comes up to me, just because like for a long time it really was like a quality game studio, and now it's just so associated with like scummy microtransaction type time wasting Skinner box devices that it's just completely tarnished its reputation, pun intended, I suppose.
Recently, I've seen a few others cover an article from GameDeveloper.com titled "Yelling is Not Journalism" by developer and journalist Brandon Sheffield. This is in response to Devin Laguirre's video on IGN talking about the shakeup that Baldur's Gate 3 has caused in the developer community. Now, the point of this video isn't to pick apart the article. However, I just want to highlight some of the language that's being used, because it shows just how far we're getting from the root cause of the issue that's upsetting the customer to begin with. And I'm wondering if we're being misdirected on purpose. Sheffield's article opens up with, "There was an opportunity to give players context for why games release the way that they do. But instead, it was designed to incite anger directed at a few devs." So Sheffield opens up with a straw man, misrepresenting not only Devin Laguirre and IGN's video, but also the consumer outrage at the same time. trying to make us out to be the bad guys, as if we're just directing this at people that are innocent and shouldn't be to blame for anything. But they know that's not the case. Our anger, our outrage is directed at the companies, not at the guys that are working at the desk. Furthermore, this also goes to show just the condescending nature of the industry to begin with, that we, the consumer, need to be educated on how games are made. And if we're educated, then we'll understand why we don't get finished products, why we have to pay full price for an unfinished game, why we don't get value for the money that we spend.
I think I saw today that there's some controversy over Diablo selling a $65 American horse skin in Diablo 4. That's more than a freaking game.
No, we don't need to be educated. You need to give us what we paid for. That's it. How is this acceptable in any other industry? You don't go to a 5-star restaurant, only get half of your food, and then you're expected to be understanding because, oh, well, there's only one cook that night. You don't go to buy a new car and you're told that, oh, we're still working on the seats and the radio. Don't worry, we'll release those to you later. Why is it the expectation that we must still pay full price for a game and also be understanding of the pressures of deadlines, funding, and investor constraints?
In some ways, I think you could say it's like going to a restaurant, getting your food, finding out it's cold, then telling the waiter, and then they're like, okay, we'll stick that in the microwave for you for 30 seconds. Only for by the time to get it back to you, it's lukewarm again. Like, a lot of these games aren't coming out finished to begin with. It's infuriating. This guy is pissed, yeah.
Furthermore, why is our focus continuously being reverted to the polish of a game rather than the value that the customer receives from playing it? You can go to a 5-star restaurant, receive half of the food that you would elsewhere, and still get the value for the food that you paid for.
That's a good example.
We see this in indie, single, and AA games time and time again. Baldur's Gate 3 is a $60 game, yet it provides the customer with far more value than many of the games that the AAA industry has released over the last few years. And it doesn't ask us for any more money or make any excuses. Even when the conversation first broke out on Baldur's Gate over on Twitter, again, the discussion was boiled down to polish and scope rather than valuable experiences. Why did the players love Elden Ring? It's because...
And to be fair, I like to bring this up because I think it's really easy to overlook. I wouldn't say Elden Ring even finished or came out in a complete finished state when it released. And it took them a couple of months to, flesh out the rest of the quests. Nefeli Lu, Gastok, Kenneth Height, that quest was broken. Patches' quest was broken. They added in Jarbairn later. So I do think this is kind of relevant to keep in mind that Elden Ring isn't quite the shining beacon on the hill as some make it out to be.
Because they felt that their time was valued playing it. They felt like they got their money worth out of the money that they spent on the game. They had fun playing the game. Time and time again, we're told these PR lines from publishers and AAA developers. We're sorry. We're listening. We hear you. But they're not. Because if they were listening, then they would understand that we're not doing this just because we're trying to complain. No, we're doing this because we want to save them. They're the makers of some of our favorite games of all time. But the problem is that the more profit-driven that they become, the further they get away from the passion of making games in the first place. It's like a gem collector turned mining outfit. They used to do it for the love of the gems that they were collecting, but now they're just mining for every resource they possibly can get out of it. And now all they're going to be left with is rocks until the eventual collapse of the mine. Sheffield.
I don't know if that was the fairest comparison because I feel like there was a lot of, profit-driven motives even in, ancient times, but I digress.
Sheffield goes on to explain the rocks that we get, saying, in abstract, here's a big part of it. Games release in imperfect states because devs either run out of money or shareholders of their parent company mandate that the game must come out in a certain window, which devs have no control over. They run out of money trying to make the best game possible in the least amount of time. Devs rarely control their own budget and are trying to make as much cool stuff as they can with the time that they're allotted. In short, for one reason or another, they are often forced to start selling the game in order to pay for the completion of the game. This has been done through DLC, patches, early access, and yes, even microtransactions for ages because of rising expectations for AAA and because big studios are beholden to financial year results and reporting to their investors. Devs burn through their life force trying to make this happen, and it's upsetting to see this brought up with absolute incuriosity. And this is it. This is exactly what I'm talking about. This misunderstanding that we, the consumer, blame the developers that are working at the desks when in fact it's the company who we direct our dissatisfaction towards.
So I might take a bit of a contrary stance and say that the devs do need to be blamed to some degree, because certainly while the companies are, profit driven, I think that kind of inadvertently absolves the devs, the lead devs, the, game directors of their, I don't want to say sin, but like of their decisions to have games at certain like graphical fidelity levels that they can't necessarily meet, which causes a lot of bloated time for development, rather than focusing on what they can based on the budget that they're given in terms of both time and actual like money to spend, and creating products that align with that budget to make a high quality end product for their customers. And so I do think it's like a two-pronged problem. And if you think about like the state of gaming right now, Lords of the Fallen came out. It's like a whole next gen, game release. It has kind of amazing graphics with Unreal Engine 5 and whatnot. But I don't think many people are going to champion Lords of the Fallen as like the best up and coming Souls-like when we have Lies of P, which has, much worse graphical fidelity when you compare the two directly. And it's been received tremendously well as far as like the fan community goes, who are like fans of Souls-likes and whatnot. And so, as always, I'll again turn to Persona 5 versus Final Fantasy 15. When's the last time you heard anything about Final Fantasy 15 other than me complaining about it in this exact format compared to Persona 5 or the Persona series? I mean, Persona 3 just got remade kind of in the Persona 5 style of graphics because it's relatively inexpensive to do so. The narrative is engaging and fans wanted to eat it up, and they did. And so like all the Atlas fans are happy. So yeah. And then, as Astanek says, in all fairness, some devs do get the timelines changed on them. That is perfectly fair, and I think that is exactly what happened with Overwatch 2, that they just got the Activision Blizzard crunch, and it just kind of absolutely killed the game because they couldn't focus on the core features that they originally envisioned. Then Papa Jeff left Blizzard and Overwatch 2 floundered. It was forced to come out in a very unreleased state right before the winter holiday rush and all that, and look at where Overwatch 2 is now. Scally's says corporate is very often to blame, but when every single disappointment cites time constraints, you run out of sympathy. Yeah, and that's fair too. Like, we don't have to be sympathetic to the devs or the corporations for whatever constraints they set on themselves. Like, as the end user, all you need to do is voice how your experience with the game impacted you. And if you felt as though it was negative or didn't, meet your own internal standards, you're very well free to bring those criticisms up. Iman says, Lords of the Fallen did cross-platforming, and that excuse in your mind is part of many of the existing problems. Maybe, but I mean, that, as you said, that's just kind of an excuse. And I feel like Lords of the Fallen's problems aren't necessarily about like the graphics and what's the word? Not gameplay, but like, anyway, like, I know they definitely had issues, and that really has impacted like a lot of people's impressions of the game, but I don't necessarily think it was, even if you didn't have like actual like performance issues, that was the word, performance issues with Lords of the Fallen, I don't think it was quite as good of a game as Lies of P, But I also think it was kind of better in other regards. It's a little bit apples and oranges, to be fair.
We see it for what it is. Productivity being pushed by overpaid CEOs and the shareholders they answer to that want to provide as little value as possible to the consumer for as cheaply as possible while also selling it for as much money as they possibly can. Now, even Sheffield is sold on the corporate narrative that it is our responsibility as the consumer to soak up the full game price so that they can finish making a full game later, just to appease investors, make up for their poor planning, their misuse of resources, and their lack of vision within their leadership. Moreover, why are we giving microtransactions a pass? Like, oh, guys, it's totally wholesome. They're just doing it because they need to be able to fund the game and, keep the servers up and things like that, when we know that's not the case. Otherwise, if it was, then why are they using such manipulative tactics when they're using microtransactions in the first place? Things like loot boxes, locking valuable items behind battle passes, making some of the best cosmetics in the game only purchasable from the shop. They know the tricks that they're doing, obfuscating different currencies within the game from our actual dollar to make sure we don't know how things actually add up.
Yeah, I was just about to bring that up if he did not. Scalise said, a lot of this could be addressed on the customer by not buying a game until you see how much bullcrap it's filled with. You are right there. However, unfortunately, people aren't like the most rational or the best at controlling their impulses, myself included. And quite often, the fear of missing out is strong enough of a motivator where people are going to jump on the hype bandwagon train before it leaves the station because they don't want to get left behind. And I think in many ways you could like look to a game like Diablo 4 as a good example of that. If you have like a small amount of time and only really want to play the campaign, it's a pretty decent game. It's going to keep people entertained. But even when it was released, there were a lot of content creators trying to warn the fan base that it isn't like the best game for Endgame at the time, and it's still not. It still has a host of issues, and if you're like more inclined to that type of activity, then you had better alternatives with like Path of Exile to a degree. But now there's also like Lost Epoch to like contend with Diablo, and like Diablo's kind of been imploding. That's not like really too important. But Scalise pre-ordered Liza P, and even then you still feel a little ashamed. And yeah, like that's part of the thing. Like, you want to get in on things fresh because some of the magic can really get taken out of a game if you have people like talking about it around you. You'll inadvertently get spoiled over the months. Like, even though I asked you guys to not backseat me so much within my like Lies of P experience, it happens inadvertently, not because anybody's trying to be malicious, but because they're excited and want to share. And sometimes like innocuous comments can end up being like tip-offs and can change somebody's expectations going into like a new area or fighting a new type of enemy or dealing with a boss. So in many ways, there is a lot of pressure to jump on the bandwagon when something is fresh, so you don't have those kind of other strings attached to you. So, hey, howdy, welcome back into the stream. Why do I hate that quote? About one day you'll end up in Drangleic without really knowing why. It's because, first of all, like it's a mistranslation, and then second of all, it's just so stupid. Like, to just say it frankly, oh, you're in Drangleic, you don't know why, you're gonna die, get used to it. Oh man, it just infuriates me because it's so on the nose that it encapsulates what I felt like the devs' goal was of Dark Souls 2 in a way that it just felt completely disingenuous, and that like they completely missed the point of like Dark Souls 1 and what made Dark Souls 1 like fun and funny. Whereas like Dark Souls 2 just seemed like neener kind of, and that's kind of why I hate that quote. And like the Japanese for it is, I guess I should probably like pull it up, but it's something more to the effect of like, you'll end up here whether you want to or not, which is a completely different flavor text. And the whole point of Nashandra and not Nashandra, but Shanalot and the Firekeeper's dialogue, which is shared, is that the more power you amass, like the more conflict will come along with it, which makes a lot more sense to me than what we got with the English version of the game. So it's a little bit of a multifaceted problem. All right, Crimson, welcome back into the stream. Sorry for any of the backseating. It's all right. I mean, it happens. Like I've accidentally done it to other streamers, so I'm not gonna try to throw too many stones while living in my glass house here. Liza just doesn't even have money to spend on games. No money, no problem. That's the real Galaxy Brain play right there. Yeah, and then Eliza really hits the nail on the head. You just don't have anything nowadays to be interested in enough to buy. And that's kind of what I've been talking about a lot on the streams recently, because not only do you have the games that are coming out that compare against or compete against the other games which come out, they also, in my mind, have to compete with every other game that has ever come out, which makes it a tall order to fill. Because as I was mentioning like the other night, I want to play a game that's as good as Mario 3 to me. And if you're not going to meet that quality level, like why should I really invest my time into doing that when I've got like a lot of other stuff going on in my life at this point? So with that being said, I actually do have like a lot of games that I'm excited about this year. But, time will tell if I get to play all of them, whether it be like for time purposes, money purposes, or other stuff that like goes on in life. All right, let's go back to the video.
If it was being done for such wholesome reasons, then why are you implementing it in such an unwholesome way? I think that's a word. If that's the case, then how about the $1.2 billion that Activision Blizzard made in 2021 on microtransactions alone? Did that money go into making Diablo 4 a complete game? Or Overwatch, for that matter? No, it didn't. I think Xbox perfectly encapsulates what's wrong with the gaming industry and how it's losing focus. Don't get me wrong, I love Xbox. I love Game Pass. I think it's one of the best things that the entire industry could do for consumers. However, Xbox is putting all of their focus into how they deliver games and stay ahead of the market, rather than making sure that they are delivering high-quality games, great games, and games of value. They chased the smoke of live service titles pressuring Arcane to make Redfall. They neglected the oversight of 343 working on Halo Infinite, just assuming that they would get it right, even after consecutive failures to capture the magic of Halo. Think about that. They lit Halo.
I don't know if that's fair to like place entirely on Xbox / Microsoft, but I honestly don't know enough about the situation to really know. So I just don't know what to think about this at all.
Become an afterthought in the gaming industry. One of the most influential games of all time. The game that popularized FPS controls on a controller. A game that...
Asnex is actually thinking of trying Path of Exile 2. I will say that at least for Path of Exile 1, you'll get out of it what you put into it, which is kind of an arduous thing to ask, especially of new players, because there's just so much to learn. So basically, if you really only ever focus on the next step in front of you, you'll pretty much never have a problem in Path of Exile 1, at least. But Path of Exile 2 looks so much holistically better. If you've ever watched any of like their dev interviews as they talk about the features for Path of Exile 2, honestly, they just sound like some of the smartest, most well-grounded groups of developers that I've ever heard in my life. And based off of like what they were talking about with their goals for Path of Exile 2, that actually gave me enough confidence that in the like last season I went ahead and like bought the core supporter pack for Path of Exile 1. So I spent like $100 because I like in my mind I'm like, okay, this is going to help like fund Path of Exile 2. And it just seemed like, something that I actually wanted to support. And like, I feel like when devs are open and honest about it and really truly do engage with the player feedback and take hardline stances about what direction they want the game to go in, players can act like adults and respect that there are going to be differences of opinion and differences of how games can be designed. And I just think there's like a lot of quality, legitimate communication between Grinding Gears devs and the player base that is just woefully missing for so many other companies. But of course, like GGG is much smaller, and the devs have the time or make the time to kind of like make those interactions work. So not all of these like AAA studios could do that by any means. And like, obviously GGG is from New Zealand, so they get to speak English and we don't have to worry about language barriers. But nonetheless, I'm incredibly hyped for Path of Exile 2. So I would just say, if you're on the fence, just, look into the gameplay trailers. If you like ARPGs, even if you don't, just wait for more info with like the beta that's supposed to come out later this year. Although now that they said that they're thinking about like tweaking the trade system and whatnot after like last Epoch's news, I am a little bit skeptical that they'll be able to complete the game as soon as they had originally planned for. But I think that is kind of an overall positive thing, and like the Shigeru Miyamoto type, like if you release a bad game early, it'll be forever bad. So I think overall in the long run, it's going to be a great game and really establish an entirely new standard for the ARPG market. So hopefully I'm right. I'm sure there's going to be lots to argue about and complain about after it comes out, but for now, I'm on the hype train. Astinex said, if only Destiny 2 had a full expansion bundle. Well, it's funny you should mention that, because literally the other day, or was it yesterday, I found out that D2 is having a like humble bundle thing campaign going on. Oh, the link is too damn long. Hold on, let me try this. Can I even do this? Okay, so let me post the link here in chat. You can currently, right now, as the time of this live recording, buy all of the Destiny DLC bundles for $8 American through the Humble Bundle. So if you truly do want to get into it, I think now is probably one of the best times you can, because Lightfall's around the corner. The community's died down a lot because they're not super happy about Lightfall. But if it's your first time getting into Destiny 2, then that won't really matter, because there's a lot of content to go through and you're not going to like already be burnt out. Eliza asks, what games am I looking forward to this year? So I'm looking forward to the Final Fantasy VII Rebirth remake thing. I'm looking forward to Path of Exile 2 a lot. Looking forward to the Suikoden 1 and 2 remakes, whatever you want to call those. Then Eiyuden Chronicles. So those are like the 4 big ones off the top of my head. And of course the Elden Ring DLC, if it does release this year, which is kind of why I didn't include it in that initial list there. When you hear D2, you think Diablo 2. It's $40 for the full thing? I thought there was like an $8 option. Maybe the time has already passed on that. My fault if it's $40. I saw $8 the other day.
That at one time was a pop culture phenomenon. And now what happened? How did that happen? Because they were more concerned with becoming the Netflix of gaming. And it's not just Xbox whose focus has shifted. It's almost every single AAA company. Epic Games doesn't even make games anymore. They just run off of the fumes of Fall Guys, Fortnite, and Rocket League microtransactions. EA pimps out every single game in their library outside of the rare gems like Jedi Survivor, It Takes Two, and the Dead Space remake. Ubisoft sells XP boosts in single-player open-world games. And don't even get me started on Activision Blizzard. That horse is beat so dead, so hard, that they call bug fixes Season 2 in Diablo 4. So while these companies continue to release unfinished games because they can't meet different deadlines that are set by their investors or time constraints or money constraints or whatever it is, while they continue to lose focus because they're paying attention to more profit-driven incentives than anything else, we, the consumer, have to soak up their misdeeds by paying into microtransactions, battle passes, and worse. And that's supposed to make our games better. But by the time any of these games actually do get to a playable state, or, God forbid, make them enjoyable, they're already almost coming out with the next game anyway. That doesn't seem like us helping to support them make better games. That just seems like us being taken advantage of. That seems like the consumer being programmed to continue to pay for things that we're not getting our money out of. And it's making it an expectation. How many times over the last few years have you expected a game to actually work day one on release without any issues? If you're anything like me, it's a flip of the coin. And when the coin landed on heads and it ended up actually working properly, it was a surprise. And I think to myself, maybe they got it figured out.
Yeah, I think there was like one day last year where 3 separate game companies were releasing an apology on the exact same day, which is, oh man, it's really bad. So like, what were the 3 that were apologizing at the same time? I think it was Forspoken, maybe the Immortals of Avium, and then something else. Or maybe I'm just like confusing. Yeah, because I felt like those came out in completely different times. But anyway, nonetheless, the state of gaming in general is not so great for day one releases. But setting that stuff aside, it's also like the best time to be gaming because there's such a huge library of games that are now like affordable because they're so old that you can get absolute steals and spend hundreds of hours playing really quality products that were released, 1 or even 2 decades ago, or even 3 at this point. So, yeah. And now we have things like the Steam Deck, which is pretty easy to jailbreak, and well, maybe not jailbreak, but to like get emulators and stuff on, so you could really enjoy those old games at the palms of your hands. And it's just kind of like simultaneously the best of times and the worst of times.
But we know that's not the case. If Elden Ring was the flash of lightning, then Baldur's Gate 3 was the thunder that followed. A classic turn-based RPG dominated gaming headlines. It turned heads and it held attention. Reviewers applauding the game as a resounding success despite the lack of polish in the later third of the game. Why? Is the game that good that it's so far above everything else that we've ever seen? Well, that's a matter of opinion. Personally, I think it's one of the greatest games that I've ever played, but I enjoy tactical combat, high fantasy, and optional multiplayer. But why did it reach such a wider audience? Simple. Widespread consumer dissatisfaction. Players are absolutely exhausted of live service models, in-game shops, buying skins, microtransactions everywhere in the entire game, unimaginative design, games constantly stealing the mechanics of another game. And while that's completely fine in some different ways, I feel like every open world game is an Ubisoft game now. You wonder why we love Elden Ring or Baldur's Gate 3 or Tears of the Kingdom. It's just because they're well-made, good games. It's as simple as that. There's no strings attached. It's not some crazy thing that you need to be able to divine. I've seen 5 or 6 different apologies from developers or publishers over the last year, just within 2023, trying to figure out, guys, we hear you, we're listening, we'll fix things, we promise. No, you're not listening, because if you were, then you would understand why we are praising these games in the first place. It's just that they're really good games. That's it. And we just want you to go back to doing what you used to do, which is making really good games. The thing is that...
And I do think trying to say we want you to go back to what you used to do in creating really good games is kind of true, but I think it's also taking a very particular lens of the history of gaming, where the best games are the ones that are going to withstand the test of time and kind of they're just always going to stand out, whereas a lot of the garbage games are just going to go the way of the wayside. And there has always been shovelware and abandonware and games that should have never been published but were but we just tend to forget about them because they were garbage games and we never focused on them. So I don't know. I feel like part of this is because so many gamers are becoming more jaded and games aren't nearly as novel as they used to be. I think it's kind of like the equivalent of an oversaturated market and moviegoers kind of like experiencing the same kind of malaise about what was releasing for quite a long time, and until like things started to get shaken up by a few more like avant-garde type films. So this is just kind of like a cycle, I think, in terms of any type of media, whether that be like literature, film, television, and even gaming. So right. Elden Enthusiast, welcome back to the stream. I don't remember if I said hello to you. And Scowlies is saying the Lies of P demo is better than a good chunk of new games. You want to play Lies of P again with the new weapon? You need to live out your Kingdom manga fantasies with the glaive? Yeah. Jesse says, we need another PS1, PS2 RPG Golden Age. Honestly, oh yeah, that reminds me. Unicorn Overlord. Or Unicorn Overlord? That looked like a really cool game that might be coming out this year. So anyway, I'm really excited about Eiyuden Chronicle because, it's supposed to be a spiritual successor to that one PS1 Golden Age game of like Suikoden 1 or 2. So yeah. Asnex says there's a great video on exactly what I'm talking about. If you have it, be sure to like link that in the comment section or on the Discord, so that way I can check it out, because this is something that I'm definitely interested in.
They can't. And the reason why they're apologizing, the reason why they're running around with their heads cut off, is because they are trying to constantly figure out ways to be able to match the monetization of the game with how the player is going to play the game, how we're going to enjoy it. Actman brought it up in a video of his, where he talked about how Diablo 4, everything in the game has to be scheduled in a certain way, how fast we level up, how fast we find items, how fast we find gear that we like that looks on us. All of those things have to match the monetization, the battle pass, all of those things. They all have to coalesce and combine.
That sucks, but to be fair, even without monetization, these are going to be general development or developer concerns. And for anybody who's really interested and wants to learn more about that topic, I do highly suggest listening to the Path of Exile developer interviews that they've been doing the past couple months. Because as they talk about their design philosophies for going into Path of Exile 2, Jonathan asked one of the people who was interviewing him, okay, if you have an absolute beginner player and a person who's pretty much a professional player of your game, what should be the kind of wealth disparity? What numbers should be the wealth disparity between the new player versus the vet? And he said he wanted there to be a 1,000% difference, or maybe it was 1,000 time difference. Yeah, I think it was 1,000 time difference between the type of rewards that a new player is getting versus a veteran. And it was really weird for me to even hear that question being asked, as well as being able to put a definite number on it, just because it's really hard to quantify that, because it's generally, when you think about that as a player, it's more of a feeling than a numbers thing. But because he's the lead developer, he has to actually come up with a target goal and a rationale as to why that would feel good. And 1,000 times the difference in the wealth sounds absolutely ridiculous when you first hear about it. But honestly, the more you play through the game and understand the difference between a completely new player, in the very beginning of the game, versus where you end up way later on, it kind of makes sense. And he did a great job of explaining that philosophy behind all that. You thought metaphorical unicorn? No. So yeah, I know Unicorn Overlord is not the best name of a game, especially for us edgy 30-year-olds. But honestly, I was really surprised when the trailer came out, and I was quite interested in that game. I kind of forgot everything about it now, but if it had me interested enough to be interested in the game despite the name, there's probably something really cool about it. So I should probably like look back into it. And I saw that there was like another video that came out about that game like earlier this week that I meant to check out, but I just haven't yet. Crimson says, those dev interviews are actually top tier. They've interviewed like 4 to 5 players and you've heard them all. It's insane the level of understanding they have of the scope of their game. Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah, they're like schooling players that have like played the games at the highest levels for years. And like, not only that, when the Path of Exile, like top tier gamers ask the devs questions, they're like literally listening to those questions, contemplating it, and readjusting on the fly whether or not they think they could implement those changes into the game and whether or not they are congruent with what the devs are thinking. So, there's like one question that got brought up about like pausing the game and whether or not that would allow them to like affect the hardcore player base, and they wanted to make some change, like the players that are like super into that. And Jonathan was like, oh, I don't think we can do that. And then he's like, actually, wait a second. I think we've actually solved this problem. But was there a reason why we didn't have this like this way before? And so he's like, no, I don't think so. I think, yeah, we could definitely do that. And so he just like changed his mind on the spot, and they're going to like prioritize making like this one hardcore feature for Path of Exile 2 in the base game. And so like it was, to me, it was just absolutely a sea change to see a developer say like, oh no, we can't do this. This is like not what we're thinking. And then just pivot on the spot, live, off the cuff, thinking it through out loud, and then changing their mind and like saying that they'll implement it as a feature. Like that is just so beyond the realm of crazy to me. It's just, it was awe-inspiring. And that's why I felt so comfortable and confident in, buying their core supporter pack because of that. Asenex asks, what's the suggestion channel? It's literally channel ideas and server feedback. So you could place all the videos there if you want.
That's incredibly difficult to do, especially when you're trying to make something that's actually enjoyable to play. Earlier, I talked about how different institutions and publications or journalists were pushing back on the gamers and our outcry and our outrage, and how they were dogpiling on us. Dogpiling on our needs and the narrative of the pushback that we have against the profit incentives of these companies and how we want better games and more complete games. According to the business research company, the global microtransaction market will grow from $67.9 billion in 2022 to $76.6 billion in 2023, which is over 30% of the estimated $200 billion the gaming market will earn in 2023. It's really profitable being anti-consumer, especially when you start cost-cutting and you're also not held responsible for the state in which your games are released. I mean, they have turned our understanding that creative projects are difficult to make and are iterative processes in their design and made it into a normalization that we must buy unfinished products and wait for them to patch it or release more content in the future. All the while, they're stealing resources from places where they need to go. And what customers really end up paying for is the $80 to $100 million that they're spending on marketing budgets for these AAA games. And it really doesn't help that our regulators, those in government, aren't working to protect the customer, mostly because either they're too old to understand or because they're incentivized not to through lobbying to protect the interests of investors and these large publicly traded institutions. Luckily, there are some countries like the Netherlands who are moving to ban things like loot boxes, and what's great about that is it makes it really difficult for these companies to be able to release their games in, well, just about anywhere once other people start giving them even the slightest amount of pushback.
And I know like some people were trying to praise Overwatch 2 for getting rid of the loot boxes, but as far as my understanding was, I kind of felt like their hand was forced because the EU was changing their laws to outlaw loot boxes. So they pretty much garnered no goodwill from me personally, but others didn't feel that way. And I'm like, did you guys just like not know about this? Like The reason there's no more loot boxes is because it's illegal in some places.
By prioritizing profits, the makers of our favorite games, our most beloved games of all time, are losing touch with their customers. While they may not see the immediate effects of this because the silent majority continues to buy their games and interact with microtransactions, we're seeing a slow shift spurred by the vocal minority. When you see a classic...
All right, hold on here. This person did not eat no damn pizza, nor did they have any chips. And the way that I know that is look at the pristine condition of this controller. Tain't no grease nowhere on it, and you don't see no damn paper towels nearby. This is some marketing play right here, unless this is the pizza sauce right here. Maybe that's what it is.
A slow shift spurred by the vocal minority. When you see a classic RPG based on Dungeons and Dragons explode onto the market, breaking all-time records on Steam, you're seeing a greater shift in the market. Social media is much stronger than the AAA industry. Some of the most popular videos on YouTube and TikTok are those complaining about the state of Diablo 4, Overwatch, Warzone, Destiny, 2K, and more. The virality of that movement goes past the vocal minority and into the wider market. As economic strife and rising inflation make it more difficult for people to buy luxury goods, they're far more careful with their spending. They do their research. And when a simple Google search reveals how people just don't trust your game or your company, customers are far less likely to make purchases regardless of how you try to manipulate the market through nostalgia or through marketing. I brought this up many a times on my podcast, which is every Sunday, 2 p.m. PST, right here on YouTube, by the way. But crypto games never stood a chance, and they never will. And the reason why is because they are based on monetization. No matter what they do, they have to start from the monetization first because, well, it's in the name. It's a crypto game. It's not a game.
Yeah, you're not boiling the frog starting at lukewarm water. You're just immediately dropping somebody into the boiling water, so they're going to try to hop out of it.
It's a crypto game. And because of that, they'll never actually be anything. Because what great game do you ever remember that they ever started from how are they going to sell it? How are they going to monetize it?
Arcade games, The Simpsons arcade game, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle arcade game, and that's about it. Yeah.
The inspiration for most games that we've all enjoyed have always been somebody's great idea that it was something that they themselves were going to have fun playing. A valuable experience that they would enjoy. And that's the whole point of this video. That's the whole point of what this conversation should be, is that we just want to have valuable experiences and have our time valued for playing the games that we get. Now, I've seen a lot of people try to parse out and say, you know, I give $1 per hour value for the games that I play. You know, if it's a $70 game and I get 70 hours out of it, then yeah, you know, that was a good game. No, it doesn't necessarily mean that. Did you actually value the time that you spent in that game? Will you remember it?
I think that right there is an excellent question as an addendum to that thought process, because even I've had that thought process at times where it's like, okay, I played Destiny 2 for this amount of hours, and so I feel as though I got my money's worth for like buying the expansion and whatnot, and I don't necessarily regret it. I had, you know, my own fun and whatnot, so it's not that big of a deal to me. Or sometimes I'll use that to like rationalize if I want to support like other developers. Like Path of Exile is a free game, but I played it as much as like a normal game, so maybe I'll throw the devs like, you know, $30, like the equivalent of a game on sale, just to help support them and honestly buy some stash tabs. But we don't talk about that too much.
Was it enjoyable? There's tons of games that you can spend $60 and $70 on and not enjoy. Doesn't mean you got your money out of it. It's not how that works. I just want good games. That's all we want. We just want our time valued. We want the money that we spend for the game, but we want it to actually mean something in the first place. It's really not that complicated, and I don't understand how it's so hard to be able to communicate that to the developers in all of these different conversations that we've had. I want to experience...
Well, I think part of the reason is that you're never really addressing the development process, you're addressing individual developers, or not even like addressing them specifically or individually. But if somebody, makes art assets for a game like Diablo 4 and they spend, 40 or even like 80 hours each week, like breaking their ass trying to make these assets look great, only for the lead devs to make your red based fireball animation overlap with a red ground so nobody can appreciate those animations, you might feel a bit frustrated, and that the end consumer doesn't appreciate the work that you personally contributed to the game, and so you might get a little bit butthurt about that. But that doesn't necessarily mean that players are blaming those kind of individual devs specifically. It's just like the process. It's like trying to extract every penny out of the players makes them feel drained. And if somebody's drained and they feel like in order to play a new game that somebody's hand is going to reach down their pocket, it's no wonder that they're feeling pressed and are going to voice such complaints to whoever will hear them. And beyond that, I think like a lot of the devs that are in the more like leadership positions, they probably have an ego check price to pay, where they're probably not going to have a lot of the junior devs have the cojones or the security to really push back against some of these bad ideas. And even if they could, they might have their hands tied by what's going on above them. So it's kind of like a bucket of crabs, essentially. Like junior devs are being like pulled down by like the budget, time constraints. Senior devs are being pulled down by junior devs, and the whole corporate process. And then the whole corporate process is pulling everything down because they want money, and they want as much money for as little investment as they can make. And because that's such a short-sighted goal, they just keep pulling themselves down into that bucket of crabs. So crabs all the way down is kind of the takeaway so far.
Experience what it was like playing Halo for the first time again, or adventuring in Elden Ring, or Ocarina of Time. It's really not that hard. And I don't understand why they're making it that hard, other than they just want to make it seem that way so that we just keep giving them money and that they can take advantage of us. And if that's the case, and that's what they're going to continue to do, and that's the path that they want to choose to take, that's fine.
I mean, to be fair, like nobody is going to say like, "Oh man, I didn't work that hard, but I still want your money." Like it's the whole act of busy work, no matter where you're employed. Oh, boss is around the corner. Better look like you're busy. Better look like you're working hard, even if you're not. I mean, it's just kind of like one of those things. You're not going to give up the illusion that you're not putting in a lot of work or as much work as you could. I mean, most of these people are just like trying to make a living. There are very few like real passion projects when you get to that level of bureaucracy in gaming. Yeah, Crimson says, "You're sure there's very talented people in the D4 dev team? It's sad that the crabs drag him down." Yeah, absolutely.
But they will fail. Because we will go places to actually get valuable experiences. Your Call of Duty will stop being purchased once somebody makes a game that has a far more valued design, something that the players enjoy more and doesn't take advantage of them. Same thing goes for RPGs, ARPGs, strategy games, puzzle games. It doesn't matter. Every single genre that's out there, the next time that there's a game that comes out from somebody else that's not taking advantage of the players, that provides a better experience because you have lost the vision of what it's like to make good games and not think about how you're going to drain the player for every cent they have, you'll lose business. And if you continue, you'll lose yours. That's all I got today. I just wanted to kind of clear this up. I wanted to talk about this for a little bit. I hope you guys enjoyed the video. I got some more articles and stuff that I'm going to probably cover maybe next week. I have a review for Baldur's Gate 3 that I'm going to do. I'm calling it a casual gamer's review. That's my thing. I'm going to be the casual gamer. Make sure you guys follow me on Twitch if you guys haven't before. Subscribe to the channel if you guys haven't. I hope you guys have been enjoying the videos lately. I hope you guys have been having a great day, or have a great day. Stay cool, stay righteous, stay safe, my friends, and yeah. Peace.
All right. Hey, Stella, welcome back in the stream. I just had like a wake-up call. This is already liked. Did I watch this on stream before? I'm tripping. Oh, man. Okay, anyway. I obviously must have enjoyed the video. Maybe I watched it on my own. No, I couldn't have, because this is in the react stream list. Anyway, that was a great video by Legendary Drops. Maybe this is the one video that I thought I saw from them before, but I just somehow didn't remember anything that he said, other than like the fact that, you know, it's true. It kind of resonates there. So, all right. I'm a little bit confused, but that's all right. Let's go ahead and go back into some of our Elden Ring lore and start off with the Coliseum by Elden Tales. Thanks for the shout out, Crimson. If you like the stream so far, please like the stream. Yeah. Oh, yeah. And I should link this in chat for you guys if you want to give Legendary Drops some support yourself. Double dipping for that stream revenue. It doesn't matter what I watch. It's the same. It's the same amount of time. All right. So let's go ahead and check this one out.
The Colosseum is an
All right.
The Colosseum is an elliptical amphitheater in the center of the city of Rome, Italy. Despite its age, it is the largest standing amphitheater in the world, with enough room to hold an estimated 80,000 people. The Colosseum was used for gladiatorial contests and...
Is it 80,000 or is it 880,000? I feel like 80,000 is more realistic. Because that's about the size of, you know, a relatively small city in modern times. So I feel like in ancient times, 880,000 would be
and public spectacles.
A ridiculous amount. But I mean, if it was Rome, that might be believable. Anyway, not too important. So yeah, this is kind of like this second time that I've noticed for Elden Tales, but I think as far as like content creation goes, it would probably be better if he slowed down his speech so that way people could follow along a little bit more leisurely, I suppose. And part of the reason why I say that is because I know a lot of people who are really into FromSoft lore and whatnot tend to not be native English speakers. So it's probably just better for the broader audience. Although if he has like this stuff closed captioned properly, it matters a little bit less there. Because that is something that I struggle with for my voice recordings, where I tend to speak more quickly. Right now I'm speaking slowly for myself, right? Because like I'm like cognizant of it, but typically I do speak more quickly, and I tend to, I don't want to say like slur, but my words do kind of bleed together sometimes.
Including animal hunts, executions, reenactments of famous battles, and dramas based on Roman mythology. Outside of the gladiator games, other shows occurred within the structure given by private individuals rather than the state. These performances had a strong religious element, but were also demonstrations of power and family prestige. A gladiator in the Roman Empire was an armed combatant who entertained audiences in violent confrontations with other gladiators.
Man, this takes me back. I recognize this exact photo from like a book that I read when I was a kid about like Rome and the Colosseum. Either that, or I'm just like mentally mapping the last dude in Gladiator onto this guy right here. Anyway, Elden said, "You're glad that I pointed stuff like that out in an earlier stream, because now you're mindful of your speech speed. You may even take the extra time to add subtitles for non-native speakers." Yeah, so you don't necessarily need to worry about adding subtitles too much. And since I don't think you've really uploaded anything before, what you can do is post your script into YouTube in a text file, and use that as the basis for your closed captioning. And Google does have an auto caption feature, so it'll map your text file onto your video itself. Or you can go in and time it manually, or you could do the most work and just hard sub your own content. And so that way you don't need to worry about like YouTube and whatnot.
wild animals, and condemned criminals. Most were despised as slaves, schooled under harsh conditions, socially marginalized, and segregated, even in death. Many gladiator schools and amphitheaters were sited at or near military barracks, and some provincial army units even owned gladiator troops. A major attraction within the Colosseum was the animal hunt. This utilized a great variety of wild beasts, mainly imported from Africa and the Middle East, that included creatures such as Caspian tigers, panthers, and Barbary lions. Battles and hunts were often staged amid elaborate sets with movable trees and buildings. During the lunch break period of the animal hunts, they would stage executions. Those condemned to death would be sent to the arena, naked and unarmed, to be literally torn up to pieces. In time, the Colosseum became a site of Christian martyrdom, where Christians were persecuted by the Roman Empire, as evidenced by the church history. Christian tradition ascribes that the Colosseum was the location where Ignatius of Antioch was fed to the lions. On the other hand, other scholars believe that the majority of martyrdoms may have occurred at other venues within the city of Rome, rather than at the Colosseum, citing a lack of still intact physical evidence or historical records. These scholars assert that some Christians were executed as common criminals within the Colosseum, their crime being the refusal to reverence the Roman gods, but most Christian martyrs of the early church were executed at different locations. Within Elden Ring, Colosseums mirror their real-world counterpart, as they reveal a closer look into the history.
Yeah, I mean, part of the reason they would have been executed in different locations is just like logistics. I mean, you're not going to take somebody who committed a crime in Ohio and then like transport them over to California and deal with them there. It just tends to be a bit more regional.
History of the lands between. There are multiple reasons as to why the Colosseums were first constructed, such as places to honor the Golden Order, a pit of sacrifice to strengthen the greater will's power by feeding the roots of the Erd Tree, or as a way for Godfrey and his warriors to release their lust for battle. Many enemies to the Tarnished are associated to the Colosseums, including Crucible Knights, Duelists, Lion Guardians, Fire Chariots, and Mad Pumpkinheads.
Wait, is he saying that the Crucible Knights were not part of them and they were like enemies? Because I would disagree with that, because we're told verbatim that the Crucible Knights served Godfrey.
These large arenas were once used as a place of ritualistic brutality to honor the greater will and, by extension, the Golden Order. The Golden Order used these arenas to display their military prowess by achieving victory over their enemies in battle.
And again, this is like one of the points that I will disagree with, because my interpretation of the timeline is that the Golden Order came into being when Radagon became Elden Lord, or like approximately around that time. And so I would say this is more or less to honor the Erd Tree, which is kind of actually explicit here with the ritual sword talisman, which says a talisman patterned after swords used in ritual combat held to honor the Erd Tree as opposed to the Golden Order. But I do understand, like, you know, people disagree with me and they believe that the Golden Order was established with Godfrey, which is perfectly fine. But for anybody who like is curious about my thoughts on it, that's kind of where I would have a disagreement. And part of the reason why I bring this up is because sometimes information gets taken for granted, which isn't as explicit as it may seem. And so letting stuff like this go over time can lead to what I would say would be like false impressions of the lore, or at least incomplete impressions. And when you let things slide like that, it becomes really easy to take it for granted yourself. So in some ways it does annoy me to be this pedantic all the time, but in other ways it's kind of like for the greater good of the lore in my mind, I guess. I don't know. So I struggle sometimes whether or not I should stop, or whether I should just like let things go for the sake of the flow.
The bodies of those sacrificed were then sent to the catacombs below to feed the roots of the Erd Tree, to provide the greater will with energy. Notice how each of the Colosseums are located near catacombs. Each catacomb is either near a minor Erd Tree or the Erd Tree itself. The Crucible Knights were used to represent the Golden Order.
I don't know if I would say that this is a fair comparison between the Caelid Coliseum and the minor Erd Tree, because like at that point, like it's so distant, I feel you could compare it to anyone. And like there's no minor Erd Tree near the Limgrave one at all. Or is he just saying like it's just near catacombs? Oh, okay, maybe he's saying that. Yeah. So even with the catacomb comparison, I do think this one is a little bit more distant, but maybe we could kind of reconcile that with the gigantic warrior pot in front. So they could have just buried their dead in that guy. So Asenex said they'd be considered enemies later on, the Crucible Knights. Once the Crucible was out of power, wouldn't they? Godfrey's elite likely got a pass. So that's kind of bringing up a different timeline of events there, because he was saying like during the time of the Crucible, they would have like been enemies of the Erdtree, which I strongly disagree with. And for what it's worth, the Crucibles died out by the time of Radagon. So the former duelists of the Colosseums would go on to become Grave Wardens. So even in that paradigm, I don't quite believe that works out. So yeah. Hey, Buster Suds, welcome back in the stream. It's going pretty well. How about yourself?
Erdtree, or the Erdtree itself. The Crucible Knights were used to represent the Golden Order in the arena against the enemies of the Erdtree, like the Great Serpent of Mount Gelmir, and
Okay, so he may have just like misspoken before. That's fine.
the Fire Giants from the northern mountaintops. Enemies of the Erdtree were often symbolized by bronze, like the Visage and Coil Shield. The enemies of the Golden Order were defeated again and again in these battles to symbolize their victories that occurred in the past. Audience members of the Colosseum delighted in seeing these bronze effigies beaten and battered. As mentioned, the gladiator games were closely associated with Rome's military. Meanwhile, the Crucible Knights played a big role in the Colosseum, as well as the Golden Order's original military power. Side note, in Sparta, a city-state.
For what it's worth, we're not told specifically if the Crucible Knights did have a big role in the Colosseums, but I think you could still kind of come to that conclusion a bit, just because of how the ritual sword and shield talismans do kind of resemble the armaments of the Crucible Knights. But yeah, it's just not explicit there. Buster Suds is doing well. You got done with some homework and was happy to see the stream was on. All right, nice. So yeah, we do stream very consistently at 9 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, or no, 10 p.m. Eastern Standard Time every night. Although I'll kind of stop streaming temporarily while Final Fantasy VII's Rebirth comes out. So yeah, glad you can make it in.
In ancient Greece, it was a military powerhouse. They ritually humiliated the Helots to keep them in their place. The inhabitants of Sparta were stratified as Spartiates, citizens with full rights, and Helots, state-owned enslaved non-Spartan locals. Sparta's famous militarism was inseparable from their all-consuming fear that they had of their oppressed neighbors, the Helots staging a rebellion. Sparta's professional army was only possible by using their enslaved neighbors to farm resources and keep the city-state functioning, while the Spartans honed their soldiering talents. The Spartans' fear of Helot revolt resulted in ritually humiliating them to keep them in a lower perceived social standing.
And that's not too different from other forms of feudalism that would follow, like the whole idea of knights in shining armor are kind of only possible from having a lower class of fiefs or farmers or peasants rather, to kind of indirectly fund them through their taxes of their like goods that they would produce and whatnot. So yeah.
Helots were subjected to various
Sparta's
degradations,
overrated.
including forced drunkenness, demeaning public spectacles, and most horrifyingly, ritual murder as a part of a Spartan coming-of-age ceremony. These measures served only to make the Helots hate the Spartans even more, guaranteeing future Helot revolts and worsening Spartan paranoia. There was at least one Helot revolt that led to an agreement in which they were given safe passage to leave under the terms that they would be re-enslaved if they ever tried to return. Sparta was above all a militaristic state, and emphasis on military fitness began at birth. If the baby was born puny and deformed, then it was discarded as a primitive form of eugenics. There is controversy about this matter in Sparta though, since excavations in the chasm where the babies were said to be sent only uncovered adult remains, likely belonging to criminals. Although unable to be proven true, the practice of abandoning deformed babies also reminded me of how those that were born in the lands between with features of the Crucible were either killed or thrown into the sewers below the capital.
So Scowleys asks, are there any farms in the game? Like you guess the windmill village is evidence because windmills are used to mill grains? Or did people just soak up the golden light from the tree and chill? I like that question. So there is a little bit of evidence of like farmsteads and whatnot. Dominula is the most prominent example. There is also, to a lesser degree, like Jarburg with their kind of like gardens and whatnot. But generally speaking, there aren't like a lot of fully featured prominent farms in the traditional sense of the word, no. But I feel like it's supposed to be implied, and when you go into like Stormvale or parts of Lanedell, you'll still find like food and food products like in baskets and barrels. So they seem to be getting their food from somewhere, or it's like not really a problem for them to get food. And it's just kind of like one of those things where you have to suspend your disbelief a little bit, just as with them lacking outhouses and toilets in all the FromSoft games. The lack of miracles used for growing crops is disappointing. Well, if it makes you feel any better, there is that Land of Reeds that we see in the DLC cover images in there.
The Duelist helm, modeled after Roman Murmillo gladiator helmets, states that the wearer becomes an easier target for foes, which shows that their defeat was not only frequent, but also that they were given equipment that gave them a great disadvantage in battle. Duelists were used to represent the Great Serpent, which is viewed as a traitor to the Erd Tree. The Duelist's furled finger is used to attack other Tarnished in multiplayer. It is a finger of corpse wax with bronze adornments. Corpse wax is used by gargoyles to mend their weapons, as well as their own bodies, a patchwork of champions. If you look at a gargoyle's physical features, they appear to have two heads that have been patched together. This appearance matches the twin sages, Ranni's twin faces, and of course, the fusion of Marika and Radagon. Corpse wax may be produced from a body that has been burnt by the black flames of Destined Death. Destined Death was sealed in Amalekith, and there is a gargoyle protecting his alternative form in front of the bestial sanctum.
I really like a lot of these comparisons, although, to be fair, I'm not entirely sure how much Destined Death is necessary, because we do have the two variants of gargoyles, with the ones, the blackened ones being more specifically related to Malekith, whereas the other, like, normal gargoyles are not blackened, and they do lack the holy type damage that you would be associated with the blackened corpse wax and whatnot of Destined Death. So while I do think these are really good points, I'm not entirely sure how relevant, maybe not relevant, how impactful they really are in just relation to Destined Death specifically, but nonetheless, good stuff here.
Regardless if corpse wax is a product of Destined Death, the name itself, corpse wax, is made from the dead and therefore could be the same material used to seal living jars. Living jars carry the dead remains of those who have fallen in battle back to the minor Erd trees to provide them with nutrients.
Although, one other point to bring up with this whole Destined Death thing is, if the gargoyles were made potentially from the flames of Destined Death, that should raise the question of whose Destined Death was it? Was Malekith doing all this stuff? It was the Glomide Queen already defeated, and that's, like his role? Or was Destined Death still actually a thing in the time of the Erd Tree under Godfrey's reign? I'm of the opinion that it was, and I might be able to use this for some support of my theories, but I don't think there's really enough for me to say it a bit more definitively from this angle, so I might just kind of let it go there. So, hey Hilko, welcome back into stream. Crimson wanted there to be some of the grape orchard areas from Final Fantasy 16, where you have lots of rolling ground, meaning areas where the land is higher and lower. Yeah, so stuff like that I think is really cool. You could also have rice paddies grown into the sides of the mountains. I forget how they're called, but underneath ground in Liurnia, in the Lake of Rot area, it looks as though you could have that kind of multi-tiered rice paddy design going on, and I was very frustrated we could never go to that part of the map because it looked really, really cool, but yeah. Anyway, I digress. It still feels like in live streams the TV's talking back to you, which is a childhood dream. And nice. Yeah, I never really was that interested in the whole Back to the Future style talk to a face in the wall and they kind of talk back. And it's kind of funny because now that dream has become a reality, and it's just really ironic to me because people freaking hate it. They're like, why are you video calling me? This could have been a text. And so it's just kind of really ironic to me.
Larger version
Terrace
of the living
farming,
jar,
yes, exactly.
called the Great Jar, is guarding the entrance to the Caelid Coliseum. To gain admission to the Coliseum, the Tarnished must prove their skills against the Knights of the Great Jar, 3 duelist NPC invaders who are most likely contained within the Great Jar as those who have fallen in battle during their time in the arena. Under Roman law, traitors to the state receive the most humiliating punishments, like
You know, I never really thought about the fact that you kill those invaders and then they could have been like within the jar themselves. That makes a lot of sense, and I'm kind of surprised I didn't think about it, even though they're like literally directly related to the jar. I just kind of took it as like a weird invasion thing and didn't think too much of it, I guess.
being condemned to the beasts in the arena, with almost no chance of survival. Within the Colosseums of Elden Ring, they once used beasts as well, called Lion Guardians. Lion Guardians are aggressive beasts that fight using blades that are grafted onto their arm. All Lion Guardians are found in regions that are associated with Colosseums, the only outlier being 2 lions found at Castle Sol in the mountaintops of the Giants, a castle that's related to Godwin. These lions, like
I feel like this kind of rough to say regions with Colosseums because Redmane Castle is about as far as you can get from the Caelid Coliseum as you can within, you know, the bounds of Caelid. So I feel like that line is a little bit disingenuous, but nonetheless, we do know that Radahn was a huge fanboy of Godfrey, so I don't really take it to be like that amiss or anything like that. But there is the one rando guardian lion that's kind of like a bit south to the Death Bird that's next to the swamp of Ionia in Caelid, and he's just kind of chilling for whatever reason. But yeah,
Sirach are visually connected to Godfrey, Godwin's father, as well as their grafted blades connecting to Godric, kin of Godwin. And Essidarius was a type of gladiator in ancient Rome who fought from a chariot. Within Elden Ring, there are 2 types of chariots. The first type is simply called a chariot. They are colossal machines found in Heroes' Graves dungeons. The second type are flame chariots, war machines modeled after the faces of fire giants, mounted with fire-spewing cannons. Redmanes use fire to combat the Scarlet Rot-infested wilds, which is why you can find them being used within Radahn's ranks. The fire chariots are also found protecting the main gate of the Raya Lucaria Academy, and on the western edge of Mount Gelmir, all locations related to the Carian family. Their mechanical design reminded me of the Abductor Virgins, which also have ties to the Carian family.
yeah, and apparently in cut content, the crest of the hawk may have been meant to be related to Rykard, and on the flame chariots themselves, they have the crest of a hawk on their base. Let me pull up my folder to see if I have an easy screenshot. Oh man, what would I have called it? Maybe if okay, no, I actually labeled it properly. All right, so this is the flame chariot, and this is like the hawk crest. It is a little bit different from like the Stormveil hawk crest and all that, but this is a symbol that shows up in a bunch of random places. So, all right, yes. Let me look up the Leyndell stuff. I should type in hawk now. So I don't think it's the same one as the inverted hawk tower shield. Let's rotate this. Yeah, so it's kind of similar, but mostly not. Actually, it's a lot more similar than I gave it credit for. Anyway, so it's not the same as the Stormhawk Ancient Sigil of the Hawk, but outside Leyndell, you do have the kind of banner showing up in the war zone between the ramparts. And if this was supposed to be related to Rykard, that would make a lot of sense because of the first events of Leyndell, like the whole bloody conspiracy, all that fun stuff. But I don't know how relevant that is to the final game, and the Hawk Crest flags might meant to be related to the Banished Knights now, but we just don't really know. There's a hawk chair in Stormveil, apparently. Oh, yeah, and Stormveil does have, like, a different type of hawk crest going on. Hold on. I think that's about it for the Hawks. Yeah, just probably the same thing. Okay. And then the funny thing is, like, this crest around the hawk is just facelifted from Dark Souls 3's Cathedral of the Deep and given like a wooden texture as opposed to like marble. Anyway. Hilko asked, could the gravestone stairs be more than just gameplay convenience? Like, the lore involves the terracey nature of the lands between. So this is headcanon, pure speculation, but I've wondered whether or not there have been differing shattering style events that have taken place over the lands between that we don't know about. And if so, could the lands between have been like shifted and or molded like a pizza dough? I think that's a strong possibility because I don't see it being very practical to build tombstones coming out of the sides of cliff sides quite the way that they are. Although who knows with those types of ancient civilizations. So that's a good question. Alexander should have gotten bigger as he scavenged more bodies throughout the game. Shake your head. I think that would have been a cooler idea if he got bigger after like the little lava lake. But otherwise, it doesn't make a lot of sense for an inorganic creature like a pot to get bigger. But yeah, it also doesn't make a lot of sense for the giant pot in Caelid to be that gigantic now, does it? He was also going through some character growth, like literally. It's like he's growing in power, getting closer to his ultimate goal. Yeah, I mean, it can make sense, but it also is kind of weird. I kind of like wished for that as well, but I just kind of have mixed feelings about it.
Pumpkinheads are towering humanoids that wield massive weapons and wear distinctive pumpkin-shaped helmets. These mad soldiers are all that's left of broken gladiators, and they are agitated by bloodshed or the humming of insects. Bloodshed makes sense, as it could be a form of PTSD from their time in the arena. But what about the insects? Could this be a reference to cemetery shades? Insect-ridden gravekeepers, the pumpkin helm being used to ensure that the bugs do not attach themselves to their heads.
That's an interesting thought. Honestly, my first reaction would have been like, no, it kind of makes more sense for them to be annoyed by the sound of insects through things like blood flame and the blood-tinged excrement. But maybe this makes sense. I honestly don't use like the blood flame stuff a lot. Maybe it would be worth testing on the pumpkin dudes. I think there's supposed to be an interaction, but I actually don't really remember.
Interestingly, there is a breed of pumpkin called gladiators. This breed is said to have improved disease protection. Raised next to other pumpkin varieties in field comparisons, gladiators showed improved homozygous intermediate resistances to powdery mildew. During the reign of Godfrey, the first Elden Lord, the Colosseums were at their height of glory. This glory was ended with Godfrey's absence of the lands between during the Long March. You could argue that the Colosseums were abandoned over time because while Godfrey was a lord of the battlefield, his predecessor, Radagon, focused more on scholarly pursuits of the Golden Order, like mastering incantations. But, as we discussed in a past video about Damnatio Memoriae, it is possible that the practice of ritual combat in the Colosseums ended out of a political tactic by Radagon in an attempt to condemn the memory of Godfrey and his golden lineage.
So the reason why I believe the practice died out is because I think that's when Destined Death was removed from the ring, and so there was not really a lot that they could continue to gain from continuing the practice of the Colosseums. So that's just kind of what makes sense to me.
We find Colosseums in Limgrave, Caelid, and Lindell. The first Colosseum was built in Lindell, within close proximity to the Erd Tree, and a place to honor the glory of the Golden Order. The second was...
Is it confirmed that it's actually the first one there in Lindell, or is this just kind of like headcanon? Because, I mean, it would make sense if it was, but, I mean, I don't think we actually know.
Was established in Limgrave, a territory now ruled by Godric, a descendant of the Golden lineage. The final Colosseum is located in Caelid, and after its combatants had been exiled, they seem to have found a new purpose within General Radahn's ranks. Radahn is also shown to use both Lion Guardians and Flame Chariots, as both are found at Fort Gale, the same location we find the Star Scourge heirloom. Although Radagon's father was Radagon, he looked up to Godfrey as a role model. This is why within Redmane Castle, Radagon is defended by both a misbegotten warrior and a crucible knight, to represent both Radagon and Godfrey, respectively. It's generally accepted that the brick hammer was once Radagon's, meaning that he was the one that once led a rebellion out of revenge, a rebellion that was quelled by Godfrey. This event begins to...
I don't know about this, but anyway, like, yeah, I guess like some people do think Radagon does have more of a connection to the Misbegotten because of like the internal file names. I tend to treat the internal file names with a bit of skepticism, and while they can be relevant at times, there's also times where they don't seem quite so relevant. And I don't know like how good of an example this is to use because I don't necessarily look at the internal file names a ton, but for, is it the Traveler's attire? It mentions that it used to belong to Melina. And I guess I should specify like the Traveler attire is the set that you get side of the Scarlet Ionian Bloom right next to Millennia's boss room. So not Millennia's one, but the flower next to it. And that wasn't in 1.0 for whatever it's worth. And so maybe there was like a typo on the dev's part. And rather than saying like Melina, it was meant to have read like Millicent, because that can make a lot more sense to me. But anyway, setting that aside, there's also the weird case of Marika of Daughter really being like Musume Marika, which could mean like Lady Marika for Melina. And so I don't think many people are going to be super receptive to the idea that Melina is Marika, but from the internal file names, that is kind of the suggestion that I think it would make. So keeping that stuff in mind, should we really consider the Radagon Chimera of the Misbegotten to really be related to Radagon? Maybe, maybe not. For what it's worth, what are they called? The Red Wolves of Radagon in Japanese are just kind of like called the Radagon Wolf. So it could potentially imply that Radagon could have been a wolf before, depending on like a certain number of factors. Like, don't really believe what I'm saying there. Like, that's just like, oh, well, what if there was the Radagon that was Radagon before Radagon was a wolf? Anyway, that's not too entirely relevant. Scalise said, the people stopped dying and all the warriors said, nah, it's just not the same anymore. Exactly. I mean, I wouldn't say exactly. I mean, I did say exactly, but, you know, I'm just kind of going with it. Elden feels the exact same way I do on the internal files. Though you do believe they're still relevant, you'll say for now, Radagon to you represents something else. All the Misbegotten are begotten, not made. I'm not entirely sure what exactly you meant by that last sentence. I might be misreading it. Maybe you forgot a word. I don't know. All right, so let's go back to the video.
To paint a picture of their rivalry, along with the fact that Radagon's own son admired the first Elden Lord to such an extent that he adorned lions on his armor to display his respect. A respect for a man that once defeated his own father. I believe that Radagon was once a Misbegotten himself, a member of a race that was once...
Wait.
...to display his respect. A respect for a man that once defeated his own father.
Does he think Godfrey defeated Radagon? I'm confused here. Maybe it's here. No.
I believe that Radagon was once a Misbegotten himself, a member of a race that was once treated as a lesser than by the Golden Order. This resentment may have fueled Radagon's decision to close the Colosseums in an attempt to erase the first Elden Lord from the history of the lands between.
So although I'm not necessarily a fan of that theory, I do appreciate that he prefaced it by saying like that's what he believed. So that kind of like gets a pass for me.
However, the Ritual Sword Talisman says the practice of ritual combat had died out by the time of King Consort Radagon, making it sound like it had died out before Radagon's return to the capital to become the second Elden Lord.
And I think this might be a Japanese thing. Let me pull it up. Ritual Sword Talisman. Because I felt like I looked at this somewhat recently. Yeah, it's a little bit vague here. where it's saying like it doesn't really say by, so you can read it as though it's in. Oh yeah, I should make it bigger. Yeah, so like it just says Radagon's time, the Coliseum, the like fighting place was abandoned, kind of. So it doesn't really say by or like if this is his time. So because it doesn't say like by the time of Radagon, it tends to read a little bit more naturally to me to say that it was in his time and not necessarily by it. If that makes sense. Yeah. So ultimately, it is a little vague there, but I feel like the more natural reading is just it was in the time of King Consort Radagon, the age of King Consort Radagon. Elden said it was Christian theology stuff. Oh, Jesus is begotten because he is God. Okay. To create is to make something different and independent from yourself, and that's the logic behind what you're saying. Okay, I get you. In Tolkien, the dwarves were made by someone other than God, so they got treated differently by everyone else too. Okay, makes sense. Thank you, guys.
Therefore, it is possible that Marika was the one behind the closing of the Colosseums. Marika, due to her being the head of the Golden Order, is also heavily associated with the Colosseum, as her statue can be found at each location, as well as her statue at the Round Table Hold being an access point to travel to the Colosseums directly. Marika could have ended the practice in order to starve the Elden Beast from feeding off of the sacrifices the Colosseums produced. In closing, the Colosseums provide a great deal of historical context for the lands between. They were used to honor the
So that's an interesting idea. I've wondered something similar before, but if this were to be the case, I think it is relevant to ask when and why that would have happened. So if Marika wanted to starve the Elden Beast by the time of Radagon, what does that mean for like the rest of your timeline? Did Marika begin to doubt the so-called holism of the Golden Order like at the beginning of Radagon's reign here? I don't think like that's what people who really believe like happened if they believe the Golden Order happened way earlier. So he might want to think this one out a bit more thoroughly. And even if he does, he might stick with this, but I just don't know if he like really thought about that angle at least.
Beast from feeding off of the sacrifices the Colosseums produced. In closing, the Colosseums provide a great deal of historical context for the lands between. They were used to honor the Erd Tree and the Golden Order in the minds of the populace, while the bodies that were ritually sacrificed were given to the roots of the Erd Tree and minor Erd Trees to power the Elden Beast.
So again, that isn't necessarily explicit, although I think that's a very reasonable conclusion to make regardless, even if it isn't explicit. But I do kind of lament that it's not set up that way. Or perhaps I'm forgetting like another item description where it is spelled out. So if anybody in chat knows, like feel free to correct me like whenever, because I would rather be proven wrong and have the correct information than continue to inadvertently supply misinformation to you guys.
Colosseums were used as cruel institutions to humiliate those that the Golden Order viewed as enemies. Those that survived were either exiled or left broken by the events they experienced within the arena. Death smiles at us all. All a man can do is smile back. Thank you so much for your time today, and as always, I sincerely hope you have a wonderful week.
So even though I do have a couple issues with how this video was set up, I really did like a lot of the observations that Elden Tales made here. It was pretty straightforward, and there was like that one time where he did make it clear like what his belief was, which was perfectly fine with me. So if it was just tightened up a little bit more, I would, really appreciate that to keep things a little bit clearer for people who aren't as knowledgeable about the game. And I'm saying that even like regardless of like the differences of opinion about when the Golden Order came into being, it's just like some of the random claims as though like the Leyndell Coliseum was first. It might be, but I don't think we actually know that for sure. So that's kind of the stuff that I try to avoid as much as I can. So I'm going to go ahead and link it into chat for you guys if you want to give Elden Tales a like and or a sub. I'm not subbed. I thought I was. Okay. All right. So that was a pretty decent one. Now let's go ahead and check out a new video. I guess it's not so new anymore. Bernahl's Underrated and Wild Quest, Elden Ring lore by Miss Chalice.
Bernal can first be encountered at the Warmaster's shack in Limgrave, and his visual presence alone radiates power.
Oops.
He is adorned in heavy silver-plated pauldrons and greaves. This style most likely draws inspiration from Lorica segmentata, segmented armour commonly worn by Roman legionaries. Another noteworthy item of clothing is what looks like a cingulum militare, a metal belt worn not just as an accessory, but as a symbolic badge of military status. Propped alongside Bernahl is another visual testament to his might. A Zweihander, literally a two-hander sword, is impaled in the ground. Historically, these swords were much larger than average, measuring at least 5 feet long and weighing between 2 and 4 kilograms. Hence its name. A typical person would need 2 hands to wield such a large, heavy sword. This
Insert Guts meme about it being more a hunk of metal than a sword at all.
sword's description emphasizes its sheer size, explicitly stating just about the largest sword a mere man is capable of swinging. True to its name, it is designed to be wielded in both hands, but those of merely ordinary strength will still struggle to do so. It underscores the Herculean strength required to handle such a weapon. That is why it is so impressive that Bernahl uses a Zweihander and does so with one hand. Now the words big sword, one hand may have conjured up in your head some characters like Guts from Berserk or Cloud from Final Fantasy, characters who showcase both their physical strength and their exceptional skill to defy the norms of typical swordsmanship. There are instances where they don't utilise this one-handing ability at all times, indicating that it's a conscious choice based on the situation or character preference. This suggests that there are strategic benefits to using both hands in some instances. Bernahl's combat animations show he can effortlessly change from one- and two-handed swings if you make him hostile in Limgrave. Much of this reminds me of a scene from Bleach, where
So I don't necessarily mind this comparison, but I don't know like how relevant it is, because it's not exactly limited to Bernahl to switch between one-handing and two-handing a weapon. The Mimic tier can do it. I know Vare does it from time to time in his fight, so it just seems like a kind of normal NPC thing, I guess.
Apache, a savage captain who lives for a fight, says, "Did you know that a sword is more powerful when you swing it with 2 hands instead of 1? To which everyone reading and watching, and even the enemy he was fighting against, went, "Well, yeah, obviously." Until now, you have only seen Kenpachi wield his sword one-handed, but that was mainly as a self-handicap. Difference and potency when he uses 2 hands is unmistakable. Two-handing weapons requires more care and timing in exchange for more power.
And Kenpachi Zaraki is like one of the best characters for just being like so ridiculously badass in like anime. Like he's kind of like the quintessential like berserker essentially. And so yeah, I just kind of like the parallel, even if it isn't like too important, I think.
Any greatsword user can tell you that. You can't just spam slash and run away. You have to pick your moment and lock in. But returning to Bernahl, he demonstrates his capability of doing both stances. His NPC programming will switch between them if you get into combat with him, and he will show you why this place is called the Warmaster's Shack. He is indeed that Warmaster. But I have already gotten too far ahead of myself. I've barely introduced this guy and I've already referenced three completely different franchises. What is a video essay without a million tangents? Characters like this are larger than life, and you can bring characters like these to life yourself with Display, the sponsor of this video. These aren't regular posters, they are high quality designs printed onto metal panels, individually signed off by their master of production. You can customize, collect, and rearrange them however you like. They have over 1 million designs, including officially licensed brands like Elden Ring, Dark Souls, Warhammer, Fallout, and World of Warcraft, just to name a few. In just 20 seconds, you can turn your bare, dull walls into a gallery of your special interests without even drilling a hole. Simply use the cleaning wipe, press down the protective leaf, and stick the magnet onto that, and the disc plate will attach instantly to your wall.
Honestly, I didn't know about that. That's a pretty nice feature, especially for people who rent and can't necessarily drill holes into like their landlord's walls and whatnot.
It's easy, safe, and quick, as Display delivers worldwide in only 4 to 5 business days. Holidays are coming, so now is the best time to...
Yeah, I was just gonna say, it's gotta be great to like place that on the wall and just have it not be level, just like slightly tilted. That would get me kind of tilted. So make sure to bring your level for your disc plates.
Buy an awesome present for your family, friends, or yourself, because you also deserve a gift. Whatever game, show, or aesthetic you like, Display will surely have something to match your passions. So I am offering 20% off 1 to 2 disc plates, or 30% off 3 or more disc plates, simply by using my code Chalice at checkout, or click the link in the description to have the discount applied automatically. That's code Chalice. Thank you again so much, Display, for sponsoring this video. Now let's return to Bernal.
Yeah, guys, treat yourself this Valentine's Day. Show yourself the love you deserve and get yourself a Miss Chalice disc plate.
One of the first things that Bernal says to you is in the form of a question.
Let me ask you something. Are you here in the lands between to take up the fight? Does your faith in the guidance of grace hold firm, despite the collapse of the Golden Order?
Your answer to this won't drastically alter the trajectory of his questline, but it will introduce variations in his subsequent dialogue, depending...
Yeah, and that's kind of like one of my favorite things about Elden Ring, because Bernahl kind of remembers you and what you say. I actually didn't recognize that Bernahl was Bernahl when I got to the Volcano Manor because he had his helmet on. So I was kind of like, oh yeah, this dude seems really cool at the War Master Shack. And then I was like, who's this jerk when I got to Volcano Manor? Because he was like a lot less friendly and warm. And then as I like played through the game more and was like messing around with a lot of the NPC triggers, if you don't talk to him at all, he's just like, who the hell are you? Kind of when you like make it to Volcano Manor, which I thought was kind of funny as well.
Depending on what you answer here. His probing question is to assess your loyalty to the Golden Order. Your options to answer are a firm, yes, I'm faithful, or a more uncertain, I'm not sure. As a side note, it's interesting that there is no option to declare you are a non-believer. This likely stems from the fact that you meet Bernahl very early in the game. If there was a choice to say no here, it would allow players to prematurely dismiss something so fundamental at the beginning, instead of organically developing their own perspective on the state of...
So this kind of reminds me of like another Terry Pratchett quote where it was like, it's really hard to be an atheist in the Discworld when there are gods who will like hear you and take offense at that and level your house with a boulder and whatnot, or you just like something like that. And so that just kind of like makes me think of that in relation to not being able to declare yourself a kind of atheist or whatever the equivalent is in the lands between here.
Of the world as they explore. But irrespective of your answer, Bernahl will remain amiable. If you affirm your faith, his response carries a hint of nostalgia.
Yes, you're a tarnished through and through. Takes me back. But that's a quality needed now more than ever.
This is a subtle nod to his past. Perhaps he too was once a devout Golden Order follower. That is what I will uncover later in this video. If you give the uncertain answer, Bernahl will appreciate your candidness.
Actually just made me think of something. A follower of the Golden Order. It's interesting because now that I recall, Melina does say that to be like a tarnished and try to become Elden Lord does violate the Golden Order. And I wonder if part of the reason for that is, like, in my timeline of events, I've always been saying Radagon and his time is the Golden Order. And I guess that would necessitate that the Tarnished aren't really technically part of the Golden Order at all. And so a Tarnished coming back to become Elden Lord should potentially violate the Golden Order, which, I mean, it kind of does. So maybe that makes sense to a larger degree than I had thought. So I might want to think about that a bit more. Because, I mean, that's just like my vibe check right now, but there might be like more things to consider in relation to that.
Honest to a fault, I see. Such thoughts won't behoove you as a tarnished. But there's nothing wrong with that.
Using the archaic word behove, meaning befit, shows that he recognizes these internal struggles are unsuitable, yet he refrains from criticizing your wavering belief. Rather than dissuading you, he encourages you to preserve your faith in the Golden Order. This is done by one tiny change in his dialogue. If you answered not sure, Bernal will refer to you as a good tarnished. But if you answered that you are loyal to the Golden Order, he dubs you a good and proper tarnished, adding weight to the notion that this is what you are meant to be. Bernal is harboring a past that defies the typical tarnished archetype.
Wait. I want to make sure that I heard which choice related to what properly there.
To you as a good
Hold on.
Order. This he encourages you to preserve your faith in the Golden Order. This is done by one tiny change in his dialogue. If you answered not sure, Bernal will refer to you as a good tarnished. But if you answered that you are loyal to the Golden Order, he dubs you a good and proper tarnished.
Okay, so that might throw a wrench in my other idea about the whole tarnished relationship to the Golden Order. Although maybe it doesn't exactly, because I do believe that Radagon and Marika could have tarnished the tarnished together, and that would have like gone into everything. So following the Golden Order versus not, I mean, yeah, it's just kind of an awkward thing. I should like look into this dialogue a bit more.
Notion that this is what you are meant to be. Bernal is harboring a past that defies the typical tarnished archetype. But I've stalled long enough. Who is Bernal really, and what does he want? Bernal will remain in Limgrave, offering Ashes of War for sale, modifiers that allow you to customize your weapons with different skills and abilities. This is again a testament to Bernal's combat prowess. However, his existence is not just that of a simple vendor. His narrative takes a turn when you reach Volcano Manor. Entering the rebel hideout, you stumble across a seated figure adorned in that distinctive and familiar armor, yet this time with a hidden face. This helmet marks the final piece of the exquisite armor Bernal wears. It's completely fine not to recognize this person as Bernal initially. I certainly didn't on my first couple of playthroughs. The famous Zweihander is strangely absent. Bernal now clutches a unique-looking scepter in its place, quite a change from the formidable sword I discussed earlier. I will also touch on the significance of this new weapon in a bit. Upon being reunited, Bernal's greeting is far from a warm welcome.
You. What in heaven's name are you doing here? The Volcano Manor is a pit of recusants who spit at grace and hunt our own kind. I hope you understand the weight of my words.
Bernal issues a solemn warning about Volcano Manor, displaying genuine concern that you do not know what you are getting into. Now, if you don't know, the quests associated with Volcano Manor consist of taking assassination contracts from the Lady of the Manor, Lady Tanith, and the targets are the Tarnished, the very same ones that you share your cursed fate with. That's what Bernal is referring to by our own kind. I I cover more in these 2 videos on the motive behind Volcano Manor, so I recommend watching them if you want to know more about this debased organisation. In essence,
Schollies said all the military people just felt old from hearing behoove as archaic. To be fair, how often do you say behoove if you're not in the military anymore? It is kind of an archaism. Not exact like that. It's not really an archaism, but it's certainly not a common word for the common populace. And hey, Chubby Owl, nice to see you again. How you doing? Good versus good and proper. You'd like to know what is the Japanese with that? So yeah, I was looking at that. Unfortunately, I don't have the context quite in which it appears because of it's just a text dump, so it doesn't say like what is yes and what is no. But I was trying to like look up behoove, but I couldn't find it here, so I don't know if my text dump is missing a little bit of text, and I might need to find some. But yeah, I'll look at that quote in a second here after I find it and whatnot. Studying for exams? My condolences. I don't know. I actually kind of enjoyed studying. Maybe not studying so much. I enjoyed school, so good luck with all that. Ask Next says it's a perfectly cromulent word, and it behooves you to know that. Oh, thank you.
Since Volcano Manor symbolises rebellion against the Erdtree, the Golden Order, the Greater Will, all of it. As Tanith reveals, the Lord of the Manor, Rykard, refused to grovel and scrounge for power after the Shattering, so he dedicated his mind and body to a life of blasphemy.
Right, I'll probably need to like back up because honestly I got distracted over here. I apologize for that. So, good and proper. So he says like Kimi no Yona Masugu or Masuguna Asebito, which Masugu means like straightforward. And hold on, does it say it? Yeah, like straight, direct, up front. And so good and proper. I mean, as far as like a localization goes, that's perfectly fine. And this is kind of like one of the issues when I think people place a lot of weight on the English version of the game, which I mean, I don't blame them. It's because like sometimes we can like place undue weight on certain words or phrases that might not be as compatible with the Japanese text. So it is kind of good, I think, to like look at the Japanese here. Whereas, where was the other one? Tarnished through and through? Yeah, okay. So this one, he says Tadashiku Asebito. And Tadashiku comes from Tadashi, which means like right, correct, and whatnot. Yeah, right, properly correct. And so I'm blind. Okay. A tarnished through and through. So you're proper tarnished versus like he wants to tell somebody like I almost said like proper here, like they're kind of equivalent. I don't really think there's meant to be too much of a difference between like what he means between these two texts. No, maybe that's a lie. So like Masugu could mean like direct. So yeah, that probably makes more sense. Like he's saying he wants to tell a direct, upfront, tarnished like us, and maybe not perhaps like a proper one. So maybe there is a difference. Proper tarnished versus a direct one. Yeah, I guess there is like a slight difference there. But this one is not good and proper. So it's almost like yeah, oh, okay. So I see now. So this one, I think to say good and proper implies a quality about the tarnished rather than like the individual, with them being direct and to the point and like honest. And what was the other one? Just a tarnished through and through. That seems pretty comparable, I think. So then what was her point a second ago? this one's proper. Yeah, I wish. So I think this is going to be the yes answer. Do you believe in the Golden Order? Yes, you're proper tarnished. Do you believe in the Golden Order? No. Okay, then I want to tell an upfront and honest tarnished about this. Or like, anyway. Yeah, okay. I don't think it like matters too much, but it's kind of fun to look at nonetheless. What did I study? I studied English and Japanese. All right, here we go.
Volcano Manor symbolizes rebellion against the Erdtree, the Golden Order, the Greater Will, all of it. As Tanith reveals, the Lord of the Manor, Rykard, refused to grovel and scrounge for power after the shattering, so he dedicated his mind and body to a life of blasphemy. His followers are known as recusants, recusant meaning someone who refuses to submit to an established authority. In this
Yeah, and the Japanese for it is like back turner, essentially. So they like turn their back on the order.
context and world, that is the Greater Will. Recusants hunt other strong tarnished, proving their mettle to be recognized as champions and earning an audience with Lord Rykard. So Bernal.
So Crimson asks, he takes the proper tarnished more seriously, maybe? I would say no. It kind of feels like he is giving us lip service because we believe in the Golden Order. He's like, oh, a proper tarnished, aren't we? Whereas when we're like, oh, I don't know, he's like, oh, you're going to be like upfront and direct with me, eh? I can respect that. So I don't know. I don't really think he's like making too much of a value judgment. Yeah, maybe I should bring this up. I don't know how much you guys know about like Japanese culture, but even without Japanese culture, it's still definitely a thing. We just don't really have a label for it in English. So there's a concept of what's called honne and tatemae, with honne meaning like somebody's real feelings, and tatemae, tatemae meaning the face that somebody wears in front of other people. And so it's kind of equivalent to the whole questions posed in Persona, where it's like, depending on who you are around other people, you could be wearing like a mask of the version of you that's like more preppy, more of like a jock, all that kind of stuff, versus the person that is you when you're home. And so like, that's just kind of something that they recognize here. And so I feel like Bernahl saying, oh, you're a proper tarnished, he's just kind of putting on his tatemae and not really wanting to incite a lot of unnecessary conflict, which is kind of interesting because even though he's part of the Volcano Manor, he doesn't seem to attack people indiscriminately. It seems to be all for like a kind of greater purpose, I suppose. Hey, John Paul Corcoran, welcome back into stream. He at least thinks yes is the proper answer for tarnished, kind of like how Varia is like, that's great when you say the fingers were normal. And yeah, that's a great parallel to bring up, that like Vare, for as sarcastic as he is being, especially with that delivery by the voice actor, that's kind of like the expected answer that you're supposed to give. And you're just like, okay, that's great. And you like smile and nod, and you can't wait for this bumbling idiot to get out of your hair. And you kind of want to wait for somebody like more useful to come by. That's kind of like the vibe that I get from this interaction here. But I honestly think like Bernahl is much more genuine about it. So, right. Buster Suds is in their last semester to get a history degree with a minor in geography. And one of the reasons they like Elden Ring so much is because of the similarities in how people research the lore and how historians work. For better or worse, that's great to hear, because there's a lot of conflicting ways to go about both. And it's really fun to try to suss out the truth between them. So yeah, I could definitely commiserate with that. So glad to have you here.
To be recognized as champions and earning an audience with Lord Rykard. So Bernal is shocked at your presence, in this extremist establishment. In response to his warning, you can confidently express that you understand the implications of your whereabouts, to which his subsequent response will vary depending on your earlier answer to the loyalty question. If you initially responded with, "I'm not sure," Bernahl, acknowledging your lingering doubts, will remark,
Well, as long as you understand what you're saying. You have harbored doubts from the very beginning. Perhaps this day was always lurking on the horizon.
Bernal recognizes that your doubt guided you away from the Golden Order, rejecting their guidance from the outset. Conversely, if your previous answer was, "My faith holds firm," Bernal contemplates your decision slightly differently.
I thought you were tarnished, bred by virtue. Perhaps playing that part led you to your doubts, I wonder.
Here he briefly ponders your former steadfast beliefs, and how that relationship with your faith led to its downfall. Regardless of your reasons for embracing your new life as a recusant, Bernal issues a final warning. One final chance to get out.
I was going to say, honestly, like, this get up here is just so distracting. This kind of reminds me of like Pro ZD's like ass kicking outfit skit, where it's like you kind of wear whatever works that gives you like the biggest increase in stats to kick a boss's ass, between like the crown and I think this might be a Karia Nightsword, but then just like the this is the Godric. No, this is the Lane Delcer coat or whatever it's called, isn't it? I think so. Anyway, it's not too important. It's just kind of an interesting getup.
Bernal issues a final warning. One final chance to get out. A final chance to not become like him.
But know that the path you walk is blasphemy and leads only to a miserable death. Before you consider hunting any of your own kind, think on that.
This path will only lead to a miserable death. Foreshadowing at its finest. Should you continue the Volcano Manor questline, Lady Tanith will assign you your first contract to kill a specific tarnished. Upon your return, Bernahl, now resigned to the reality of your chosen path, reintroduces himself.
So, you've bloodied your sword in the hunt. Then I shall introduce myself once more. Bernahl, a recusant just like you.
This moment is pivotal. Bernahl is the same man you met in Limgrave, but little did you know then that he was a recusant. When you consider that, it reveals Bernahl as incredibly respectful and noble. He could have preyed upon your rising doubts and tried to recruit you in a vulnerable moment to join the Volcano Manor. But he didn't. He saw something in you, something good, and he tried to nurture that purity. But now, seeing as he cannot dissuade you any longer, he accepts your choice and extends his hand in camaraderie. He welcomes you, acknowledging a shared fate as brothers in arms and blood. Speaking of blood, I cannot fight the feeling that there is a Bloodborne comparison here. The recusants of Volcano Manor, akin to the hunters, engage in the grim task of slaughtering their own kind, the tarnished in Elden Ring versus the so-called beasts in Bloodborne.
The recusant must hunt his own kind. To raise the flag of revolt against this sanctified pillaging, we recusants must become the most wretched of predators.
Bernahl's dialogue, laden with references to the hunt and blood, draw a parallel to the tragic city of Yharnam. Hunters and recusants alike find themselves pitted against their own kind in a grim pursuit of slaughter that some do with gleeful bloodlust, and others guilt and reluctance. After you fulfill Tanith's next contract, Bernahl will invite you to join him on an exclusive side mission. This is a surreal concept when you think about it. This mission...
Why was that like blurred out?
Exclusive side...
That's weird.
Mission. This is a surreal concept when you think about it. This mission entails confronting and defeating some of the original members of the first Round Table Hold, specifically Wilhelm and Vargrim. You may recognize the latter as one of the primary characters featured in Elden Ring's promotional material, identified by his distinctive armor, the Raging Wolf set showcased in marketing and concept art. and you're about to take him down side by side with Bernal within the confines of the fortified manor, a location in Leendo that is speculated to be the original Round Table hold. The theming, the significance, and the structure of this encounter are amazing. As I said, this is a duo invasion, you and Bernal versus Wilhelm and Wagram. Amid the invasion, you get...
All right, Ask Next, you have a good night, and thanks for joining in as always. So, just to go on my whole spiel again about, like, when was Destined Death removed from the Elden Ring? When was the Glomite Queen defeated? I do think it's very interesting that Wagram does have the Godslayer's Greatsword here, and I think we should question, like, when he attained it. Was this something that he had before he was exiled from the Lands Between? Was it something he retrieved after he returned? We don't really know, but if it was the former, then that could imply the Glomite Queen, was defeated pretty early in the timeline. If it was the latter, then it could imply either that she was defeated early or later. So it's just kind of one of those environmental details that is worth keeping consideration of in the grand scheme of things.
Bernal versus Wilhelm and Wagram. Amid the invasion, you get a front row seat to Bernal's change in weaponry. Instead of his favoured Zweihander, you see that odd-looking staff. But this is no magic casting staff, despite being called a scepter. This is a formidable great hammer. Let's take a closer look. A lengthy metal handle serves as the anchor for outstretched hands at its peak, seemingly reaching for a globe. Yet the main feature is the giant coiling serpent slithering around the handle, ascending to the pinnacle with its jaws wide open, ready to devour the world. This is the Devourer's Scepter. The weapon possesses a life-stealing ability akin to a serpent voraciously draining its prey's life force.
And that's something that's also held in common with, like, the Serpent Greatsword or whatever it's called, that it will allow you to drain HP from defeated enemies, I think. I don't think it's on hit, but I might be misremembering that. And Zero, welcome back to the stream. Nice to have you again.
This skill, Devourer of Worlds, will drain the HP of any nearby enemies. The snake's relentless hunger is a very fitting part of what the scepter is meant to signify. The weapon depicts a vision of the future briefly seen by Rykard in his final moments before being devoured by the Great Serpent. This wasn't done as a method to end his life. In fact, it was very much the opposite. Rykard harboured an insatiable desire to break free from the influence of the Greater Will, seeking a means to live eternally outside of their control. Rykard took the form of a giant serpent so that he might devour, grow, and live eternally. So this weapon symbolises the serpent's unending appetite and prophecy that it will one day consume the entire planet. I wanted to mention the symbology of another detail, those tiny hands that adorn the top. I at first assumed they represented the world protesting at their impending demise, hands up in a panic as they were about to be plunged into nothingness. But the small hands are actually a recurring motif on another item connected to Rykard, the Blasphemous Blade. This sword is covered in red gore, viscera, and writhing hands. These are the remains of the countless heroes he has devoured, writhe upon the surface of this blade. That may be what Bernal was referring to when he referred to the path of a recusant ending in a miserable death. The recusants, driven by the promise of fame, glory, and the life of a champion, may have been unaware of the horrible fate that awaited them. The Lord granted them an audience, whereupon they were welcomed by the maw of the great serpent, and within the serpent's bowels they became the Lord's kin. Now, it's debatable if the recusants understood what they were ultimately aiding. It's unlikely that the truth would be openly disclosed, as it would undoubtedly deter potential recruits.
Right, but in the grand scheme of things, I don't think it really matters, and I think Bernahl kind of exemplifies that as well, because the way of Rykard is essentially the way of might makes right, and so if a champion died to Rykard in combat, That's kind of justifiable by the Volcano Manor because that just shows the champion wasn't strong enough to be the victor. And so it's might makes right. The strong eats the weak. And that's just the Volcano Manor way. And when you defeat Rykard, Bernal is like, oh, I don't really harbor you any ill will in particular because you won, you know? So that's just like the way that it goes. Yeah, become family.
Prospect of slaughtering your friends only to be rewarded with one's own sacrifice to a colossal snake isn't the best incentive. Coupled with a discreet terminology referring to the process as gaining an audience with Rykard, if this was kept a secret, the recusants unwittingly became pawns in Rykard's grand scheme. Linking this back to the Devourer Scepter, rather than resisting the serpent's consumption, you could interpret those hands as pushing, propelling the world closer to the giant gaping maw. The recusants are enabling Rykard's goal, and in his vision, he sees them as expendable tools to help him. But
So to talk about this like another way and parallel it more with the Erd Tree, because there's one item that Rykard has where it says like that was the way of the gods, essentially the way of like might makes right. It doesn't quite say that verbatim, I don't recall exactly, but close enough. Defeating the champions and kind of eating them whole and making them become his kin or his family is kind of analogous to the way that the dead are buried at the roots of the Erd Tree, and they get absorbed into the roots and become part of the Erd Tree and potentially fulfill it with the kind of spiritual essence necessary to create like the tears of the Erd Tree, which would go on to become its sap or its amber and whatnot. So I do think of all the demigods, and I think Miyazaki agrees. I think it was like in one of his interviews, he says like Rykard like represents I don't remember what Miyazaki says, so I'll just like leave it there. But I think Rykard represents like the ideology of the old system, perhaps the strongest of all the demigods that we encounter, despite like all the snake stuff. Crimson says the way that the hands are portrayed, it reminds him of the way that the hands reach out at the final boss or second final boss in Lies of P. It's a little bit of a spoiler for anybody who doesn't know, but I do know what you're talking about there. And then Amar says, meanwhile, Tanith is trying to eat him back up while her guard defends her. It's a weird outcome. I mean, it kind of makes sense that if you're going to leave all that meat behind, that you better not let it go to waste. But no, in another sense, like by Tanith devouring the remnants of Rykard, she would be able to kind of keep the spirit of Rykard alive inside her. So I can't wait until we fight the Tanith snake in the DLC.
I went on this whole tangent about Rykard because why does Bernal have this incredibly symbolic scepter? How does Bernal know about the fate of the recusants? Why is he a recusant in the first place? We're getting there, I promise. The aftermath of the confrontation with Rykard reveals a curious indifference among the recusants. There is no open mourning for the fallen lord of the manor. Tanith too refrains from outwardly expressing anger and grief towards you for bringing about Rykard's demise. This reaction stems from the deeply ingrained belief that strength defines worth, and upon being defeated, Rykard is deemed unworthy of grief or ire. Bernal also shares the philosophy that the strong seize from the weak.
I harbour you no ill will. The strong take. Such is our code.
He responds matter-of-factly, and then goes on to discuss the future after the foundation of the manor has now crumbled.
The Volcano Manor is no more, though we may yet fulfill an old promise. We hunted our own kind, and took what was theirs, and with everything in hand, the time has come to rise against the Erd Tree.
Despite their leader's demise, Bernal expresses that he is still committed to upholding the recusant cause and rebellion against the greater will.
O greater will, hear my voice. I am the recusant Bernahl, inheritor of my brother's will, and you will fall to my blade. We refuse to become your pawns. Consider this fair warning.
So Bernal not only vows to put an end to the greater will, but he also mentions that he is the inheritor of his brother's will. With the absence of any familial context or a disclosed surname, piecing together who Bernal's brother is a little tricky.
Yeah, and as far as the Japanese goes for it, I think he says Shinyu, which is like my good friend, or he might just say like Tomo, which is friend. Yeah, either way, it doesn't quite mean brother like literally, but it could be taken as like brother metaphorically, like brother in arms type sense. So, right. Chadwick had said, from a historical angle, Rykard could be industry and capital supplanting the crown in an industrial revolutionary England, since Rykard and England ate everything in fire and barfed it into metal, and they devoured everything with the avarice of a snake, and it's a powerful evil. So I think that's a pretty cool literary comparison to make between what Rykard could represent with like the Volcano Manor, especially with the consideration of how Rykard more specifically seems to be affiliated with the type of artificed machinery in Elden Ring compared to the other demigods. So there's a decent amount of parallels there, I think, yeah. Imar says it's a dope speech against a god despite what became of him. Yeah.
Based on what Bernal tells you about inheriting a will, it's safe to assume that his brother is now deceased, and because he mentions this immediately after you inform him of Rykard's death, possibly, does that mean... I found this theory on Reddit by...
Oh yeah, so, I mean, I wasn't going to go with the child angle, but I was going to say it could be an oblique reference to Bernal being actual friends with Rykard, but we don't necessarily know that. It seems like Miss Chalice and or this Redditor might be implying like a more of a familial connection, but again, the Japanese isn't quite that strong about it. So, right. Hey, without horns, welcome back to chat. Guess you're late? Guess you're late what?
Obscene 96 that discusses if Bernal could be the unmentioned son of Radagon and Renala, which would make him Rykard's biological brother. I personally don't subscribe to this theory, although it is intriguing. I would encourage you to read it as there are some salient points, and it's certainly a different perspective, which is always fun and appreciated in theory crafting. I think Bernal possibly had a biological brother who was completely disconnected from Rykard and that family tree, but something happened to him, so Bernal swore to avenge him in response. But there isn't really any other evidence to further support or refute this. What I think...
So another thing that's worth considering is if Bernal was supposed to be a Carian child, then why is he specifically a Tarnished? Does that have any bearing on this theory, like whatsoever? These are just kind of the questions we should ask ourselves about, like how we feel about the lore here. You wish Bernal spoke to us at Fair Missoula before fighting us outright? Yeah, I definitely get that, especially with all the stuff relating to his maiden. I would like to believe that part of what he inherited could have originally been from his maiden, but I don't know how well that works with the dialogue that was given. Again, with him saying that he was the inheritor of his friend's will in Japanese, there is a little bit more room to interpret that he could be salty about his maiden sacrificing herself to the fire and him wanting vengeance for that. That is a little bit more accessible, but yeah, it's kind of only like marginally. So, well, maybe not marginally, but it's still not clear whom exactly he's referring to.
I think makes the most sense is that Bernal is referring to Rykard when he references him as a brother, but it's a brother beyond the realms of blood relations. This is supported by Bernal's camaraderie language earlier, supporting the idea that he doesn't mean a familial brother, but a brother in arms. He is pledging to continue Rykard's ambitions. So how is he going to do this? For you, it's burning the Erd Tree, getting the Rune of Death, and becoming Elden Lord. Bernal's cryptic parting words allude to the fact that he has similar wishes to challenge the established order. Surely that won't become a problem later on. When you get transported to Farum Azula and reach the Godskin duo fight, unexpectedly, Bernahl is also here as a summon sign. This allows you to team up as allies again to take on the Godskins, harkening back to when you collaborated against Wilhelm and Vagram. Now, how did Bernahl end up in Farum Azula? How did you even get to Farum Azula? The journey and means of transportation are unexplained. All you see is Melina putting you to sleep, saying goodbye, and the next thing you know, you're...
Why is this like so desaturated? She looks like gray. What the hell?
All you see is
Is this intentionally done?
Melina putting you to sleep.
Hold on, I'm gonna check my own footage real quick. I can't tell if her tarnished model is also desaturated or if she's just like worked with half the screen and desaturated the Erd Tree. Maybe the Erd Tree is... Oh, yeah, no. So she must have desaturated this. Or maybe it's just like her computer settings or something. Sorry, this really isn't important, but it just kind of caught my eye there.
Saying goodbye, and the next thing you know, you're waking up in a magical tornado land.
Well, like, part of the thing that threw me off was, like, the skin color of her tarnished model kind of didn't look that off. So maybe she's just, like, dark-skinned in game, and the desaturation makes her look more normal now.
I think because you summon Bernahl, that word implies a temporary arrival into your world. The mechanism is reminiscent of the invasion system, a multiplayer feature where players enter and exit each other's worlds for specific interactions. And speaking of invasion, after the Godskin fight and on your way to reclaim the Rune of Death, as you approach the bridge, instead of taking a right to the Malekith fight, if you go left, something unprecedented will occur. Bernahl will invade you.
Actually, like, this footage right here kind of also looks a little bit desaturated, so maybe it was just like her settings or something, I don't know.
He who was once your ally has now turned adversary. This is a shocking twist of events. The man who you just summoned in the same area to help you with a fight is now forcefully ripping through the fabrics of your reality to kill you. And I haven't even skipped any dialogue or events here. This happens immediately if you go to this location. Sadly, Bernahl refrains from talking or elucidating on his motive, but the items he drops provide us with some valuable insights. One of the items...
So... Well, I like the idea of, like, using the summon to kind of accidentally or incidentally bring Bernahl into the Tarnished's world. I don't really know how relevant this is because you still get invaded by a bunch of other recusants throughout your journey here. And not only recusants, but you can just be... Well, I guess you technically invade Varia's world, don't you? Either way, like, you still have, like, Anastasia... the Tarnished Eater who invades you. You have Henricus who will invade you outside of Limgrave. It's just kind of a very recusant, bloody finger type thing to do. So I like the idea. I just don't think it's super relevant, I suppose.
Is the blasphemous claw, a peculiar looking stone, a slab of rock engraved with the traces of the Rune of Death. Can deflect the power of the Black Blade. This is a pretty crazy item for Bernahl to have. For reference, the Black Blade is the weapon Malekith uses as the appointed guardian of the Rune of Death, and this rock has part of that power engraved on it. Gameplay-wise, it works similarly to Margit's and Moog's Shackle as an optional tool to assist with boss fight mechanics. This stone can parry some of Malekith's potent attacks by negating the effect of the Rune of Death. Once again, why does Bernahl have this item? The description of the claw reads, on the...
So I think that's a really good question to ask ourselves. Sometimes I might not place as much importance on the possessors of items as I should, but I think part of the reason why I dismiss it a little bit more than others is because of like why and how Vargrim has the Godslayer's greatsword. Like that doesn't make a lot of sense, especially since we get it from like the Kayla Divine Tower. But yeah, I feel like this is a pretty fair question, but he may have also just looted the rest of Volcano Manor for whatever items could have aided him on his journey. So setting all that stuff aside, first of all, good night, Elden Enthusiast. If you're still around, thanks for hopping in as always. You take care. And then second of all, I do think that it's no coincidence that the Blasphemous Claw has this kind of like groove jutting through it. And I think that's supposed to represent like the power of destined death within the claw. And I think you can see this exact same style crack fissure type feature in the black knives themselves, wielded by the Black Knife Assassins. And to a lesser degree, you can also see it in Malekith's blade as well, although it's a lot harder to make out in game, and it's a little bit clearer in the concept art. And that's also true of the Blade of Destined Death itself, like the little red sword thing, which comes out of the ground in the cutscene. John Paul said he did imply he was going to combat the Greater Will and said he was inheriting his brother's will, so he probably was doing the coming trespass. Yes. And not only that, if he wanted to fight the Erd Tree and like take it over and overthrow that system, then it would kind of be necessitated on him potentially following the steps to become Elden Lord, to burn the thorns of refusal or whatever they're called, rejection, and all of that manner of thing as well. So he would have needed to have fought Malekith also. So stupid Bernal, we could have teamed up and then fought. Got a little bit ahead of himself.
On the night of the dire plot, Rani rewarded Praetor Rykard with these traces. Should the coming trespass one day transpire, they would serve as a last resort foil, allowing Rykard to challenge Malekith, the Black Blade, the Black Beast of Destined Death. The claw gifted by Rani to Rykard presumably was a contingency plan should Rykard need to fight Malekith. So let's consolidate what we know. Bernal has the Blasphemous Claw, Bernahl has the Devourer's Scepter, Bernahl has a brother. Bernal's possession of these items and a brotherly bond suggest he was very close with Rykard. He was likely bestowed them by Rykard. I don't think he stole them, because he does.
So yeah, I think that's a pretty fair assessment to make. Obviously, we don't have the exact details, but as far as like plausible headcanons go, I think this one is perfectly fine.
Does have the Devourer's Scepter when you meet him in Limgrave. He won't use it in combat, but he will drop it as an item. The Blasphemous Claw, however, can only be obtained at the very end after the invasion, so this timing may hint that Bernal retrieved it post Rykard's defeat, unopposed to some corpse looting, but it is also entirely possible that Rykard could have presented it to him before he sacrificed himself to the snake.
So I think that's a lot of good environmental details to pick up on, so just kind of commending the research done here.
So how Bernal acquired it is ambiguous, but that is not the critical thing to focus on here. Why does Bernal deem it vital to kill you in this very moment? What transpired between your co-op Godskin duo fight and the approach to the Malekith fight? That might have something to do with what Bernal discovered when he came to Farum Azula.
Ooh, I wonder if she's going to say Bernal's pissed that we would make the decision to sacrifice our maiden into the fire. Although, if that's the case, I mean, technically we could do this... We could do this without necessarily sacrificing Melina, and Bernal should still invade us, right? What if he doesn't? That would actually be super cool. I mean, I'm pretty confident he does, but just, I would love to be wrong about this and, tie that all together here.
I've purposely not mentioned this yet, as that's the item description for Bernal's armor, the Beast Champion set. Silver armor engraved with tiny beasts. Beasts are drawn to champions and to lords, and this armor befits a champion worthy of becoming a lord, and that is what Bernahl was. This sheds light on his high-ranking role within Volcano Manor and his potential claim to the title of New Elden Lord. So when Bernahl came to Farum Azula, he may have grappled with newfound insights into his character, specifically when encountering its inhabitants. The Azula beastmen here are likely those same beasts referenced in his armor description. It's plausible that these beings were drawn to him in reverence or acknowledgement of Bernahl's prowess, which contributed to his self-realization of worthiness. So when Bernahl arrived at Farum Azula, his newfound validation may have gone to his head and caused him to turn on you. That also explains why, where the invader spawns, there are a lot of beastmen who will technically help him with the fight. I'm unsure if other invaders have this kind of mechanic, or if the beastmen just coincidentally happen to be around where his invader spawn is. I can't help but disagree with the conclusion that the power went to his head and caused him to turn on you. The Bernahl you knew was honourable and had your best interests in mind from the beginning. I find it far too reductive to conclude that he just became power-hungry.
Let us tread the path of the recusant together, till we reach the miserable death that awaits us.
However, these lines suggest an awareness that Bernahl knew that you had a shared journey that would always culminate in the death of either one of you. Hence, he was trying to warn you from the beginning that if you become a recusant, you will always have to face him in the end. But as a counterpoint, note that the confrontation in Farum Azula is not a boss battle, like when Gideon confronts you. Your encounter with Bernahl is an invasion. This introduces the possibility that the Red Spirit encounter here may not be the same as the real Bernahl wherever he is.
And that's actually a really good point to bring up, especially when you consider that the Vike which invades you in Liurnia is not necessarily the same Vike which you can fight in the Lord Contender's Everjail on the mountaintops of the Giants. And another thing worth note is defeating an invader doesn't necessarily fully kill them, so perhaps there is the potential that Bernahl is still alive even if you defeat him, although that would kind of buck the trend of FromSoft games where when an enemy drops like their items, they typically die. Kind of like the whole meme of if you ever see a grotesque video of somebody like getting knocked out or something, the rule of thumb is if their shoes are on, they're alive, but if their shoes came off, they're dead. It's kind of like the joke, and this kind of applicable to FromSoft here.
Invader spirits could exist as echoes at different points in time with unfinished business. For example, Millicent randomly invades you in Caelid, but this has no impact on her quest, nor does she acknowledge it ever happening. In addition, if you kill the Dung Eater's invader form, his actual form is still alive elsewhere.
And the funny thing about Millicent's invasion is she has two arms at that particular time. It's not exactly a random invasion, although, I mean, I'm certain she doesn't like literally mean it's random. But anyway, the Millicent thing, its trigger can be circumvented if you go to visit her in the church, whatever it's called, like the Rotten Church, or you know, the one north of like Gowrie and whatnot.
And this time does have memories of the invasion. So it's uncertain if Bernahl is still alive after you defeat his invader, because there are no further encounters with him to confirm this. But I believe this is a vengeful projection of Bernahl because of something tragic that happened to him. And that revelation is mentioned in the final line of his armor description. Bernahl was worthy of becoming a lord until his maiden threw herself into the fire. Another dramatic and tragic turn of events in Bernahl's story is when his maiden set herself alight, which caused him to forego his mission of becoming Elden Lord. Using the term...
So, I wasn't necessarily going to bring this up because I didn't think it was too important, but looking at the Japanese of Bernahl's set here, it says that beasts are drawn to heroes and they're drawn to lords. Therefore, this armor was of a hero that belonged to... Well, hold on. Let me try to rephrase this. Therefore, like, this is armor of a hero as a lord, kind of, like, or a hero with the status of a lord. Like, this is kind of a weird particle to conjugate, but it can technically mean to, like, to be. So it's a hero that is a lord, or it can also represent a status or an approximation of a status. So it's the armor of a hero that is like a lord, or that is a lord. It's a little bit ambiguous. And then that was, what's another word for, like, appropriate? Fusawashi. It doesn't say, like, that is what Bernahl was. It says, like, it was, Bernahl was worthy of that, or, like, that was suitable for Bernahl. So it's trying to say that Bernahl was a hero that was essentially a lord, or a hero like a lord. And then the final line is a little bit different. Or, I mean, the final line is kind of more or less the same, up until his maiden threw herself into the fire. So, yeah, the biggest difference is it doesn't necessarily say that Bernahl was a lord specifically. It says that he was a hero that was like a lord. And anyway, not like the biggest of changes, but it might be relevant.
Maiden, in conjunction with fire, draws immediate parallels to Melina. She is the kindling that successfully sets fire to the Erd tree as part of her sacrifice and purpose. There is an implication that Bernahl's maiden attempted to do the same, but seemingly failed, hence why Bernahl did not achieve Elden Lord. Enya shed some light on the necessary components needed to do so.
Special kindling is required to reignite the flame. For the flame to burn the Erd tree, a sacrifice is needed of one who envisions the flame.
If Bernahl's maiden did not meet these criteria, her sacrifice may have been in vain, leading to Bernahl's desolation and eventual abandonment of both her and his goal. Alternatively, it may not have been the result of the act that drove him away, but the act itself. Witnessing your maiden sacrifice themselves would shatter anyone's resolve. This aligns with Melina's strategy of putting you to sleep before burning herself to reduce the trauma of witnessing such an unsettling act. Perhaps seeing his maiden do the same affected Bernahl so intensely that it became his last straw, turning to the life of a recusant.
So I don't necessarily know if Melina putting us to sleep was to stop us, like, from having that trauma, or if it's something that was necessary because we have, like, a connection to the Erd tree, which is kind of somewhat confirmed with, like, the frenzied flame aspect of that. But maybe she just needed us to be asleep so she could draw on more of our conscious power because she, like, resides within us. That's something that I haven't really considered too much, to be honest, but might be worth further thought for sure.
If only we knew more about Bernahl.
Imar says that's interesting headcanon. You don't want to watch a person burning alive either. Bold move staying on the internet then.
Bernahl's maiden and her thoughts. Oh no, wait, we do. While banging my head against my desk trying to make sense of lore, I typed Bernahl maiden into YouTube to explore other people's findings, and what popped up was my cut content savior, Sekiro Doobie. In their data mining, they found an unnamed character, only in the Japanese text, who, based on their dialogue, we can conclude is Bernahl's maiden, and she is alive. When greeted, Bernahl's maiden speaks of burning herself. Please, look at my body. I have burnt myself countless times. I am certain I have become kindling. She has attempted to prove her worthiness as a kindling maiden, through a self-inflicted and painful process. Her story and possible quest appear to be about finding the right kind of fire to burn herself with. At one point she mentions, "The flame I burnt myself with is also used to prevent the scarlet rot. It is a special fire that can never be extinguished." This fire that can cleanse scarlet rot is most likely in the form of an incantation called Flame Cleanse Me. This is from the Fire Monk subclass of spells, which use the Giant's Flame, also known as the Flame of Ruin, as their source. Later in her dialogue, she seems to confirm this. "While searching for a flame to burn me, I happened upon them. The monks of the Giant's Flame hail from the snowy mountain tops." Despite her attempts and dedication to become a kindling maiden, it appears she doesn't find much success. This possibly suggests that being a kindling maiden is an innate quality, rather than something one can obtain through repeated practice. Her dialogue is filled with empty hope, and it's unclear if she is making progress. "Lord Tarnished, am I becoming your kindling? Will we both walk path together? Lord Bernal." The mention of Bernal's name here is poignant, as if she's reflecting on her actions, and somewhat crestfallen that she couldn't do the same for her previous master. Her mental...
Yeah, part of me wonders how they would have originally wanted to implement that into her quest. In some ways, it kind of reminds me of the Oriella spirit jellyfish quest line, where you kind of like get a fuller picture of what happens after that creature has died or that person has died and like transformed, or yeah, something along those lines, I guess.
State appears,
because like it would seem a little bit awkward if you like talk to her while that happened, but not necessarily out of the realm of possibility. It just doesn't seem to fit very well with our journey to use Melina as our kindling maiden, is kind of what I'm getting at.
Is to be deteriorating, and ironically enough, she does reference madness when she talks about the burning walls in Caelid and how they protect from the scarlet rot. These walls have been set ablaze and stretch wide to protect against it. However, even now, the inside boundaries of the wall have rotted. Not a sane person remains, herself included. Knowing what his maiden is like, it's more understandable why Bernahl did not become Elden Lord. With all the pieces now, it's likely that Bernahl, guided by the finger readers, may have been advised about needing special kindling. His maiden became obsessed, unable to...
Which is a little bit awkward, because I mean, this is the point where content doesn't work well with the final builds of the game, because the finger maidens are kind of against burning the tree initially until like that kind of like we exhausted all of their options. But it might work in a different version of the game, or like a different period in time, a different like parallel world perhaps, because perhaps Bernahl and his kindling maiden were going about things like a back alley kind of way. I don't know. Going through those back channels, I guess.
To acknowledge she was simply not cut out to be a kindling maiden, and eventually succumbed to madness. The tragic end of her dialogue implies her inevitable death, irrespective of your actions or sentiments towards her. In typical FromSoft fashion, her endeavours were futile, and outcome fruitless. I recommend watching Sekiro Dooby's video for her full dialogue recreation, or reading the extensive spreadsheet of text and translations by Robido the Red, Claude and Odo Kuro. All links will be in the description. So where does that leave us with Bernahl? Well, the cut content does open more doors than it does close. As I said earlier, I believe his invasion is unrelated to the relationship he built up with you. I like to think of his red spirit as the manifestation of his anger towards the unfair sacrifice required to make him Elden Lord, and so whoever would next venture into Farum Azula would face his wrath for their ruthlessness in using their own maiden as a tribute. Bernahl's past and relationships with the Golden Order, Volcano Manor, and his maiden paint a character burdened by the weight of his choices. The order in which these events occurred is still up to interpretation. I think Bernal was first initially loyal to the Golden Order, and we know this because he uses 2 Golden Order spells in combat. Protection of the Erd Tree and Golden Vow. These are the Erd Tree subclass of incantation and require faith to cast.
And right, I would say that those are not actually Golden Order incantations, because this is the Erd Tree worship ones, which she kind of said.
These are the Erd Tree subclass of incantation and require faith to cast. The Golden Vow states, this incantation has been taught to knights of the royal capital for generations, and knights sent on distant expeditions lean on it as a source of courage. The royal capital of Leendal, so Bernal was originally a royal knight and a candidate for the next Elden Lord.
Yeah, I don't know if we can say that he was a royal knight, because we know he's been collecting battle arts from the people that he's killed, and so I don't necessarily think that it's limited to his spells either. And we can also like learn these incantations, but we ourselves are not necessarily from these locations.
Until the incident with his maiden, he lost faith in the Erd Tree and what the Golden Order stood for. He went to Volcano Manor and sought to live the life of a recusant. Interestingly, when you first talk to Tanith, she does reference another Tarnish who arrived without invitation, which may have been Bernahl. He was not sought after by them, but for...
That's most likely supposed to be Dialos. Actually, I don't know how much of Dialos's quest is fully in the game, because I think like Dialos's quest is the one that I like never really figured out, because he has dialogue of where he talks about going back to Volcano Manor and like learning about them and becoming a tarnished before, or not like becoming a tarnished, becoming a recusant before you actually meet him there, but I don't know the trigger for it. So it's supposedly like after Latenna, like he tracks somebody down and he like forces them to like tell him about the Volcano Manor, and then like when you meet him in the Volcano Manor, that's why he's like, oh, I bet you're surprised that I'm here. Well, there's all this. I decided to like not be a failure. Anyway, I'm assuming it's in the game to some degree. I just probably haven't figured it out, or maybe it isn't. But anyway, I'm pretty confident that's whom Tanith is referring to. Dialos feels like the weirdest. You like the end of his quest though? Yeah, okay. He gets got. Poor Dialos.
Voluntarily surrendered himself, freezing his heart and mind for the cause of rebelling. The beasts, their eyes and ears covered, represent an oath. See nothing, hear nothing, doubt nothing, and carry on along the path set in stone. Suppose we follow the theory that invader spirits are entirely different entities than their real-life counterparts. In that case, there is still a possibility that Bernal is alive and out there somewhere. A bittersweet feeling rose in my heart when I returned to the manor to see if there was any other clues left behind, and that's where his story came full circle. There, propped against his usual seat by the fire, stands his faithful Zweihander, the trusty weapon of a man who only knew the blade. Bernal is a character I certainly didn't expect to do such a deep dive on, but that's what I love about Elden Ring and Souls games. Please let me know your interpretation of Bernal's quest. Do you perceive him as a cold-hearted recusant who values strength and nothing else, or a lost man who tried to make things right, but in the end just wanted to die at the hands of a friend? Or both? Or neither? Please let me know. Thank you everybody for watching, and thank you for such a warm welcome back to my revisiting of Elden Ring. A special thank you goes out to my patrons and channel members.
Alright, so that was a really well done video by Miss Chalice. I think that's the second one that I've seen by her, and both were really good actually. So here is the link to that video in chat if you want to give her a like or a sub. Now, I think like the only thing that she didn't really cover, which kind of makes sense because it doesn't really feed well into the rest of her video, was how Bernahl talks about the ashes of war and whatnot give meaning to death when you like defeat somebody and they're like fighting against you. And I think that's actually a really, really important part of the lore in the grand scheme of things, but it's really subtextual, and it's something that I kind of want to explore more eventually. I don't recall if I brought that up a little bit in my gold and silver video. If not, it was definitely in my notes, and I just couldn't really figure out a way to squeeze it in there. But anyway, yeah, I've got a little bit of time. So with the Bernahl thing, and actually I should just pull up the quote rather than talking about it in abstractions, shouldn't I? Oops. I'm gonna like need to actually I don't remember the words for it, so I'm gonna need to look at other stuff. Okay. So here he talks about, are you here to learn a battle art or two? There's a myriad of battle arts in these lands that I've yet to discover. Mementos of all the warriors who raised their arms in battle, lost, and died. A fine tale, all told, of true chivalric romance. That's how I fell in love with the sword and the arts of combat. It grants meaning even to falling in battle, to death itself. So I think this is very important because not only does it give meaning to death, it's falling in battle specifically, which kind of validates death, which I think is meant to tie into the like the feathered branch talismans, the red and the blue one. And when the heart is on like the brink of death, it sings, and that is what renders up a death worth offering. And so because these are mementos and ashes of war are related to memories and things like that, one theory that I have like right now is when somebody is on the brink of death, you have that trope of them having their life flash before their eyes. And I think that principle is in play at Elden Ring. And when that happens, it kind of creates like stronger memories before they die or if they survive. And those memories can subsist between like death and whatnot. And that's kind of where you get things like remembrances. And I think memory plays a much larger role in like runes than what might initially meet the surface, despite like remembrances like giving us runes and everything like that. So like I said, I don't necessarily think that idea fits in super well with like the rest of her video, so I don't fault her for not talking about it. But nonetheless, I do think this is a really nice video, and I had like very little like actual criticisms to say of it, so it's pretty refreshing. Anyway, that'll bring us to the end of tonight's stream. We will begin another stream again at 10 p.m. Eastern Standard Time as usual, so hopefully we will see you on the next one. Till then, take care, stay safe. Last Protagonist out.